but it's also a political action plan. Today, we will face and talk about the consequences of the COVID pandemic, but we also have to look at other health aspects. We also have to cushion the social impact, and this action to cushion the impact is nevertheless to also promote sustainability, especially where mobility is concerned. We are facing very big challenges. There are increasing emissions. The transport sector in the European Union is faced with it. The EU also has the mobility sector as the one with the biggest dependency on fossil fuels. It is essential that the European Union concentrates on an ambitious reduction goal by 2030. In Austria, we want to be climate neutral by 2040, but now what it is all about is to start working and building this better future. Our conference and also the Vienna Declaration have as a goal to exactly build this better future, building forward. And as far as the mobility system is concerned, we have a lot of work to do. We have to reorganize it in many ways. Also, I would like to mention a couple of subjects. We are all aware that the mobility change needs more than clean technologies. According to the principle, avoiding transport and shifting transport to other areas, we have to proceed and make sure that the mobility resources are used efficiently. But one central thing is active mobility, which promotes health in our cities and in all the regions of Europe. Train and public transport also have to be made the first choice, the means of choice for the mobility of our citizens. In Austria, we are investing quite a lot into railways and attractive tariffs. For instance, a blanket coverage ticket for €3 a day that covers all the public transport modes. But also, we have to change over the drivetrains to environmentally friendly drivetrains. Austria has the goal of producing 100% of our electricity through eco-power without nuclear power, which is not a solution for us. But also our communities and our citizens have to be supported in changing over to climate-friendly energy and mobility. Here we have a national program, Klimaaktiv is its name, and we provide advice to our citizens, and also they should promote climate-friendly environmental management and mobility management, and we also have financial support for it. Dear colleagues, especially the implementation of the mobility change requires the cooperation of all the players. It needs the cooperation of all sectors, both on intergovernmental and pan-European and national governmental level. This cooperation is really what the PEP excels at, and I'm very glad that it also leads to concrete results, such as the Vienna Declaration and the first pan-European master plan for the promotion of cycling, which will be adopted tomorrow. The next 2 decades will be decisive for our world. So therefore, today we have to pave the way. Therefore, with the Vienna Declaration, we have to prepare everything for the environmentally friendly mobility in Europe. So I wish you and our conference the best of success.
Herzlichen Dank. Thank you very much, Her Excellency Minister Gewessler. And as this program is comprising not only environment and transport, but also the health sector, it's also a very great pleasure to introduce to you His Excellency Dr. Wolfgang Mückstein, the Federal Minister for Social Affairs, Health, Care and Consumer Protection. You have the floor, please.
Sehr geehrter Herr Bundespräsident van der Bellen,
dear President van der Bellen, dear Minister Gewessler, dear Executive Secretary Algayerova, dear WHO General Director Dr. Kluge, dear ministers and dear representatives of state, dear representatives of the youth and citizens. Already at earlier meetings, there have been cooperations across countries, and they have started important changes and projects in our region in order to achieve sustainable, environmentally compatible mobility. These partnerships and the partnerships that we will create in the course of this conference will only make it possible to achieve the Paris goals and also the goals that we set here in Vienna. We can only do it together. We make joint goals that we implement regionally and globally in order to drive change. Especially at times of pandemic, it is very important to
beschäftigen werden.
Not lose sight of important subjects that will be pressing issues beyond the existence of the pandemic. The pandemic has changed a lot of things. A lot fewer people have used public transport, but luckily a lot of people have used the bicycle for the first time even. Now we have the unique possibility of docking onto this development, and we can also continue it for the future. At the same time, it is necessary for the future to not only raise the use of public transport, not only to pre-pandemic level, but also we need to create the conditions so that more and more people change over to public transport and can benefit from progressive mobility. I hope that many countries will intensify their efforts in order to make mobility more health-friendly and more sustainable. If we can do that, then also in the future we will probably be able to reduce the risk of pandemics. As we want to act in order to achieve the Paris goals and the Vienna systems, so we want to improve the mobility systems, and walking and cycling is one of the focus in urban development and urban planning. For example, cycling and walking reduces the risk of cardiovascular diseases, and it improves the quality of life. This is very important for me as the Minister of Health to promote all of this. It is clear that the positive development of our health system must improve the quality of health of our people, but this does not only depend on what happens in the health sector, but it also depends on intergovernmental and international measures. Mobility has many impacts on health and the environment. It is an example that shows how important it is to do transsectoral action and initiate this. In cities and also in rural areas, mobility influences our environment, therefore it also influences our health. The promotion of alternative mobility reduces greenhouse gas emissions and therefore stops global warming, or at least slows it down. Measures that promote the health and that help the environment also improve the health of us all by reducing emissions. At the same time, the use of active mobility means fewer noises and more green spaces. For instance, if you have paved over surfaces, then this is counter to our efforts to create effective spaces of meeting. The protection of health must be the first step only. In the future, the needs of the people should also be aided by producing the right products. This is how we want to practice a holistic approach to improve the quality of life. In order to implement that, we need a strong international partnership such as the PEP. Let us try to implement these thoughts, and let us try to leverage the synergies at this fifth high-level meeting. Let us form new alliances. Let us strengthen our alliances. Let us improve the quality of life, and let us improve also the sustainability of our health system, also beyond the borders. As part of the PEP, we continue previous goals and objectives, and This year's Vienna Declaration is the unique possibility of making a sustainable contribution to the promotion of sustainable transport, and it will reduce the emissions of greenhouse gases and improve the quality of the air. With this in mind, I'm looking forward to a constructive exchange at this year's meeting.
Thank you very much, Minister Mückstein, for your opening words and representing also the active part of the health sector in the process, as the PEP is a unique program comprising 3 sectors: transport, environment, health. I have the special pleasure also to give now the floor to Her Excellency Mrs. Olga Algayerova. She is the Executive Secretary of the United Nations Economic Commission for Europe, and the UNECE and the WHO are the 2 pillars servicing the member states in the Transport, Health, Environment Pan-European Program. Excellency, you have the floor, please.
Your Excellency, Mr. President, Your Excellencies, Federal Ministers, Excellencies, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, dear colleagues. It's really my great pleasure to open this high-level meeting on transport, health and environment. And my special pleasure was to listen to the Wiener Waltz and pictures of Vienna, where I spent my beautiful 5 years. We are coming off of a difficult year. In 2020, a large number of world countries imposed lockdowns on their population to curb the spread of coronavirus. For me, being confined to my home was a challenge. I realized how important it is for me to have the liberty of getting in a car or a bus and going somewhere different, seeing different people. Even the small act of going for a walk and breathing in the fresh air became precious to me when the liberty to do it was taken away. This really highlights the importance of transport and active mobility in our lives and how much we depend on it for economic, social, and health reasons, and even for our mental health. But of course, while transport plays a huge role in our societies and economies, it also has negative impacts on the environment and on our health. At the same time, the demand for transport continues to grow. The need for a sustainable transformation of transport and mobility is therefore both clear and urgent. The large number of ministers, particularly ministers for transport present today, is a testament to the challenge we face and the willingness to act at this juncture of transport, health, and the environment. I mentioned how important it was to me to get some fresh air during the lockdown periods. I personally have the fortune to live in a city where the air quality is usually good. But unfortunately, this is not the case everywhere. Poor air quality continues to significantly contribute to disease in the UNECE region and is the single largest environmental risk in Europe. Our transport choices directly affect air quality. And the air quality is not the only negative impact of transport sector. Millions of people in the UNECE region live with road traffic noise levels that are harmful to human health. Furthermore, over 110,000 people are killed in road crashes each year in the region. And such health impacts are not distributed equally. And we find inequalities both in terms of the negative health impacts of air pollution and noise, for example, and in terms of the unequal distribution of the benefits of transport. The pandemic has brought into sharp relief our dependence on fragile transport systems and the inequities in access. Women, ethnic minorities, the poor, each of these groups is more dependent on public transport than men and the wealthy. I was pleased last week to open a side event to this meeting on gender and transport, health and the environment. This event highlighted the importance of gender mainstreaming in improving transport and mobility. We still lack the information to quantify the progress that has been made so far, and take informed decisions on how to address remaining challenges. Ladies and gentlemen, there are numerous opportunities for improving gender mainstreaming in transport at both the policy and also the practical levels. We also need to invest more in education and in gender mainstreaming in the different professions. I think the Transport, Health and Environment Pan-European Programme, or shortly the PEP, can make significant contributions in this context. There is a consensus that as we recover from the COVID-19 pandemic and its socio-economic impact, we must do better than before. We must make our transport and mobility systems more resilient to such shocks, more equitable in terms of access, and very different in their form. You have before you a set of recommendations for green and healthy sustainable transport drafted by a group of experts over the past few months. They provide a practical roadmap for the transformation. In particular, active mobility, cycling and walking, as mentioned by Madam Minister, brings enormous health benefits, but it is often not used as much as one might wish, especially because of concerns about safety. The adoption of the Pan-European Master Plan for Cycling Promotion tomorrow will be an important step forward, but one that needs to be followed through with investment and action. The digitalization of our social lives and our economies provides vast opportunities for transforming mobility through decarbonization, from shifting meetings online to smartphone applications that simplify multimodal mobility. For physical movement requiring vehicles or infrastructure, there also needs to be a transition in our use of resources. This means to reuse of building materials, a greater dependence on green infrastructure, and the recycling of precious metals and rare earths in batteries. We must move to circular economy simply, in which the wasting of resources is rapidly brought to zero. And these are the topics that both are close to my own heart and at the forefront of the minds of leaders and policymakers across our region. I'm delighted to see their prominence in your agenda and that the draft Vienna Declaration emphasizes action. The PEP provides a means of follow-up to your decisions taken over the next 24 hours and of preparation for the next such conference. I would therefore urge you to engage in and support the PEP, not just today and tomorrow, but continuously to provide a persistent impetus for change. In conclusion, ladies and gentlemen, I wish you fruitful deliberations, a successful outcome, and most importantly, the courage to follow through. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Madam Algayerova, for these inspiring words. And I have the pleasure also to give the floor now to the fourth pillar of the whole program, the WHO, the World Health Organization. And I have the pleasure to announce His Excellency, the Regional Director for Europe, Mr. Dr. Hans Kluge. You have the floor, please.
Guten Tag, Herr President van der Bellen, Minister Gewessler, Minister Mückstein, Ms. Algayerova, Professor Hans Breunings, and Dr. Neira, colleagues and friends. It is indeed a great pleasure for me to open this meeting on behalf of the World Health Organization, which, along with the UN Economic Commission for Europe, has for nearly 20 years had the honor of servicing the transport, health and environment pan-European process, or the PEP as we refer to it. Thanks to the government of Austria for hosting this meeting and for its leadership and commitment to the cause. As Madam Minister was telling, it's great we can do it digital, but I do hope after all these digital meetings that soon we'll be able to meet physically in the beautiful city of Vienna. Also, thanks to all of you, our member states, who have worked under the umbrella of the PEP across sectoral boundaries, and thanks in particular to the chair of the PEP, Mr. Robert Thaler from Austria, and the two co-chairs, Господин Vadim Donchenko from the Russian Federation and Ms. Vigdis running from Norway, for leading on this along with the PEP Steering Committee and its Bureau. Your efforts are particularly commendable considering the times we live in, requiring swift adjustments to support governments and communities fighting the COVID-19. That this forum takes stock of the lessons that we have collectively drawn from the pandemic is key. These lessons should guide a transformation of transport and mobility, making them healthier and more sustainable. Today's milestone could not be more timely, as governments prepare recovery packages to restart the economy. We currently have a unique window of opportunity to steer this process in directions that will deliver better health, better environments, reduced inequalities, and increased resilience of our societies and communities. Globally, the WHO Manifesto for a Healthy Recovery from COVID-19 highlights ways to fulfill this aspiration. Regionally, I have established the Pan-European Commission on Health and Sustainable Development, led by Professor Mario Monti, former Prime Minister of Italy and European Union Commissioner, to resync policy priorities in the light of pandemics, expected to present its final report at the Regional Committee in September. COVID-19 has forced us to look at transport, mobility, and land use policy through a new lens of societal resilience, providing compelling reasons to support the bold, transformative solutions we need. While walking and biking are turning a growing number of cities into resilient and healthier places to enjoy and live in, there are countries that still do not consider walking and biking to be real modes of transport. Going on foot or by bike, like I'm doing daily in the city of Copenhagen, reduces physical inactivity, responsible for approximately 1 million deaths per year in the WHO Pan-European region. By walking, you also reduce air pollution, claiming more than 500,000 deaths every year, not to mention the contribution to cutting greenhouse gas emission. This is at the core of the WHO European Programme of Work, which supports the aspiration of people to be able to thrive in healthy communities, where public health action and appropriate public policies secure a better life in an economy of well-being. The Vienna Declaration, which I hope we'll be able to adopt tomorrow, is a powerful and inspiring set of commitments that can support innovative and healthy transport and mobility policies, actions, and partnerships across the region. WHO stands ready to work with you all to make this possible. Thank you very much. Dankeschön.
Thank you very much. Vielen Dank. Thank you very much also to the whole UN organizations, UNECE and WHO, for the continuous support of this whole process together with the member states. This is, I think, a winning team, and the bundling of our forces are one secret of success of the program. So thanks a lot also for the continuous support in the future of this program. Thank you a lot. Now I have the pleasure that I will invite you to elect the two ministers of the host country, so the Federal Minister Gewessler for Climate Action, Environment, Energy, Mobility, Innovation and Technology, and the Mr. Mückstein, the Federal Minister of Social Affairs, Health Care and Consumer Protection, as co-chairs of the high-level ministerial meeting. And also in the case that they have to be absence due to other obligations. Their substitutes, the Secretary General, Mrs. Ines Stilling, as well as Mrs. Judith Delegrazie, Mrs. Verena Gregorik-Schega, Mr. Manfred Tito, and Mr. Robert Thaler, all heads of department of the ministries, as substitutes. So I ask the meeting if this proposal is acceptable. I got no requests in my chat function. There are no requests in the chat, so I would say I declare the two ministers and the substitute to be elected. So congratulations, Minister Gewessler and Mr. Mückstein. And this is the time when I now have the honor to pass over the chairmanship to my Excellency, Her Excellency, Mrs. Gewessler. You have the floor for chairing the ministerial meeting, please.
Thanks a lot. Thanks a lot also to all the delegates. It's an honor to lead our meeting through the next 24 hours, if I might say so. And I'll be very efficient, or I'll try to be a very efficient chair of this meeting, because for all of you who have looked at the agenda already beforehand, you see we have a tight agenda packed with a lot of interesting agenda items. It was prepared by the Joint Secretariat comprising the EC and the World Health Organization Regional Office in consultation with the Bureau of the Steering Committee. And I would start by inviting the meeting to adopt the agenda of our 5th session as it was prepared and sent out. I am looking at comments or requests for the floor. I don't see any at this point, so I thank the meeting for adopting our agenda, declare it adopted, and can also, without much further ado, close this agenda item, and we'll move over to our next agenda item. And as you will notice, efficiency in chairing this meeting means a very good look at keeping the time. So I'll be very quick and brief in my introductions, so that we have as much time as possible for our interesting pan-European exchanges. Our next agenda item is entitled From Paris to Vienna, Reflections on Challenges and Opportunities for Urban Transport and Mobility in the Pan-European Region. It will comprise two panel debates. We'll start with panel number 1 on Building Forward Better. And I think that basically says it all. Reshaping cities and regions, mobility and transport in recovering after the pandemic. And second panel on climate neutrality, the challenges we all are ready to tackle for green, safe, and healthy mobility. I would like to introduce the panel discussion on building forward better and the challenges we face in the mobility and transport system, aiming at a green and healthy recovery from the COVID-19 pandemic. And I think we all have a very good picture, and I think Madam Executive Secretary has given a full-fledged picture of the multitude of challenges we face and what we've learned also from this pandemic situation. And I'm very much looking forward to a highly interesting panel debate on this issue, but would like to give the floor first to our keynote speaker, Dr. Maria Neira, the Director of Environment, Climate Change and Health at the World Health Organization, who will lead us into the issue and introduce us to the topic. Ms. Neira, you have the floor.
Thank you very much, and I'm very happy to have the opportunity to, as you say, lead. Is maybe a little bit too much, but at least to present some thoughts about how we will be building forward much better, not just better, much better. And I think this is a very good proposal, because we need something positive, stimulating, and something that will motivate people to do more now and recover after this terrible crisis. If I can have the presentation, please, the slides, I will try to guide you a little bit on some ideas. But first of all, let me maybe say Thank you, dear ministers, dear regional director, colleagues, excellencies, no formalities, because we have very little time, so allow me to start and maybe to be even a little bit provocative, because I understand that there will be a very interesting panel. So let me put just some thoughts on the table and trying to say why we think that this way now to move progressively on building forward much better, what are the bases for that, and how we think as well that the health will have a very good, it can be a very good engine for that and a very strong motivator. So leading together a healthy and green recovery is certainly a very ambitious plan, but the transport, the mobility, and the urban development will play a fantastic role, a very strong one, and we need to make sure that it will be the case. If I can have the next one, please. Yeah. The WHO manifesto for a healthy and green recovery from COVID-19 was given us after a diagnosis. Since we are on a medical community, we did a diagnosis, and now we are proposing some prescriptions for a healthy and green recovery. And those prescriptions started with one, which is, I will say, the most basic one. The next one, please. Yeah, the protection of and preserving the source of human health. How many times we forget that we desperately need what is the source of our health, which is nature. I mean, we obtain from there the water we drink, the food we eat, the shelter we have, and even the air we breathe, and we cannot keep on this quite ridiculous war with nature, destroying everything we touch, polluting everything we touch, and then creating around us is not supporting us. And even if we are selfish, this is not the way to protect ourselves. So the second prescription will be about, again, another very basic and common sense approach, investing on essential services. We are in the middle of this horrible pandemic and making a basic public health recommendation, which is about washing your hands, and for almost half of the world population, this is simply a recommendation place, because they don't have the possibilities to wash their hands, because they don't have water at the healthcare facilities, they don't have electricity to bring water or to provide the minimal essential services. So we hope that this recovery will be able to offer us the opportunity to change that terrible gap, and at least we will invest on those essential services, which will be a very, very pragmatic and strategic investment. No one can argue that investing in clean energy at healthcare facilities, water and sanitation, hygiene, and even soap to wash your hands will not be a basic and certainly strategic investment. If I can have the next one, please. The next one will be the next prescription will be about sources of energy. I need the next one, please. Prescription number 3 is about moving to a quick, healthy, and green transition, energy transition, if I may. The sources we are using now are responsible for more than 7 million premature deaths every year. And this is because of the combustion of fossil fuels, which are poisoning the air we breathe, which are not only poisoning the air we breathe, and they're causing air pollution and therefore getting into our lungs, producing from our lungs going to our cardiovascular system and affecting all our body. But in addition to that, they are responsible they overlap with the causes of climate change. So we have an opportunity here to be intelligent. And I know that what I'm saying is quite obvious. We need to be intelligent as a society and make sure that we stop this combustion, burning fossil fuels, which are responsible for climate change, which is the crisis we will be facing right now. plus responsible for those 7 million premature deaths, and at the same time, not benefiting at all our economy. We are spending on treating the causes and the diseases caused by the exposure to air pollution. And this is money that our society at the moment cannot afford, in addition to obviously the deaths that is responsible for. So one of the critical things we need to do now is ensuring a healthy and green transition to the Next one, please. Again, prescription number 4 is such a common sense and basic prescription. Promote healthy and sustainable food systems from the beginning to the end, including the food waste that we are generating and then we need to destroy, and again, causing a lot of damage to our nature and our ecosystems and our biodiversity. So we can, again, reduce greenhouse gases emissions, produce more food to feed our population that still have millions dying for undernutrition and malnutrition, and then creating a more sustainable economy at the same time. Prescription number 5 is where the discussion of today makes even more sense. It's about building healthy and livable cities. As you well know, the sustainable transport and urban planning will be playing an incredible role here. At the moment, our cities are crowded, are unhealthy, are polluted. Not all of them, of course. We are some privileged people that we live in certain cities that are not as polluted as others. But still, 9 in 10 citizens around the world are breathing today air that is not respecting WHO recommended standards for air quality, and most of this pollution is coming from unsustainable transport. So the more we do, and the PEP is contributing very well to that, the more we do in promoting a sustainable transport system, the more we reduce the fact that we rely on our private car, and the more we promote a good mobility, a sustainable one, a friendly one, the one that will respond to our needs as citizens, is affordable and is providing a lot of health benefits, that will be an incredible way to recover, and again, with very good opportunities for economic positive results, which are very much needed at the moment on this recovery after COVID-19. We need our economy to be better, more sustainable. We need more jobs, and we need to be conscious that this is very much at stake. The next one, please. That will be the last prescription. The last prescription is, again, a little bit provocative, which is about, please stop using taxpayers' money to fund pollution. We are giving subsidies to fossil fuels today at the amount of 400 billion annually around the globe. And then we spend 5 trillion on taking care of the patients which are sick because of exposure to this fossil fuel. So as a society, we are not very coherent in terms of our economic recovery if we don't use all of those tools. Those 6 prescriptions, I will invite you to have a look at the manifesto, because there are not just the prescriptions, and there are just the 6, which, again, we think that they are so common sense, so basic, so we have so many demonstrations that there will be good for health, good for the environment, and good for the economy, for the jobs, and for recovering as a society. But you will have, if you have a look at that, you will see that we have more than 80 what we call actionables, which are actions very much linked to sustainable indicators, everything on a very pragmatic, and I hope at least a strategic way of doing it. Next one, please. And I want to finish on time. The next one is that I wanted to introduce you to link this to how PEP has been already very successful contributing to this recovery. Somehow, this report on how we can contribute to the transport, what the the different documents that WHO and others organizations, the PEP, has been producing are so useful is fundamental for us. And this is, as I say, I think it's a very good example on the looking at transport and mobility through the COVID-19 lens. And this supporting healthy urban transport and mobility has been a good example of solidarity. Again, all the co-benefits for health that can be obtained if we promote good transport systems and we reduce pollution, and we are even to develop and provide better quality for our urban life. Next one, please. The next one is another example that PEP has contributed very much to this effort, to this recovery. So we are already advancing on this strategic manifesto, and this is the HEAT tool, which is very good, the health and economic assessment for walking and cycling. And this has been adapted to global use. So it's a tool that I think is extremely relevant now for this prescription of number 5 about the livable cities. We need to make sure that all of these evidence-based recommended interventions and tools will allow us to take more action, to be accountable for the planning, implementation, and it gives us as well the way to track progress and through transport decisions. Next one, please. Yeah, then we have to make sure that another document that has been, I think, very useful, the Urban Health Initiative, we have been trying to demonstrate through a process of working, in this case with Accra in Ghana, demonstrating that the bottom-up approach, they have a potential. We need to create the demand, is clear, and we need to make sure that the evidence produced with local data is useful for all of those policy-based scenarios that we wanted the stakeholders, the local stakeholders, to put in place. So we cannot say that we didn't have enough tools. That is not an excuse. I think all the relevant key tools are there, and we need to putting all of that together. The next one, please. This is, again, all of the I think some of the most strategic tools that can help us on the implementation of this manifesto are there, the actionables, the health in the green economy document, the PEP, transport and health, and this integrating health in urban and territorial planning done with UN Habitat can be very useful. And as I say, no excuses to say we didn't have the tools. So with that one, I move to the last one, and is inviting all of you that we are on exceptional times. We need to use exceptional tools. We need to make sure that the health community, the health professionals, the PEP network, and all of those who have been contributing to this, this is our opportunity to scale up and to move quickly. So 2 words to finish here: the level of ambition and the speed at which we implement all of that. And if we put our intelligence as a society at front, the health argument is going to win. And I hope that soon we can talk about how this recovery has been strategic from a healthy, sustainable transport, sustainability for the society, and we will all be economically much better in 1 year from now. So go for it. Thank you very much.
Thanks a lot, Dr. Neira, for 6 very concise prescriptions and also a very engaging call to action for swift and ambitious action. We'll go for it. We'll go for the discussion in a high-level ministerial panel, which will now discuss the topic. It's my utmost pleasure to introduce the excellencies who will form this first panel of our conference. I will do this with in a very concise way, without a lot of formality. I hope you excuse me for that, but it's an ever greater pleasure to introduce these people to our panel. I'll start with Adina Vălean, the European Commissioner for Transport, Mr. Talis Linkaits, the Minister of Transport for Latvia, Mr. Nasa Nuredini, Minister of Environment and Physical Planning of the Republic of North Macedonia, Mr. Jan Sechter, Deputy Minister of Transport of the Czech Republic, and Ms. Rachel McLean, Parliamentary Undersecretary of State in the Department for Transport in the United Kingdom of Great Britain and Northern Ireland. It's my absolute pleasure to welcome you all to this panel. Your panel will be moderated, and I'll start with a thank you for that as well, by Dr. Nino Berdzuli, Director, Country Health Programs in the WHO Regional Office for Europe. He will also introduce us to this panel debate, and it's my pleasure to pass the floor to you, Mr. Berdzuli.
Thank you so much, Chair. It's a really great honor to moderate such a distinguished and diverse group of panelists. And I would like to thank all the panelists for joining us today and sharing their perspectives. It's obvious that the COVID-19 is an unprecedented challenge, but also COVID-19 has made us looking at the transport and mobility through the new lens of resilience and thinking, how can we take stock of and use some lessons learned during the pandemic to better steer the actions towards healthier, more equitable, sustainable and resilient transport and a healthy recovery. How can we ensure that some of the short-term positive effects on the environment that we have seen, such as reduced air mobility, reduced air pollution and increased active mobility can be sustained over the time? We know that the COVID-19 pandemic and the crisis has brought different challenges to different sectors, and it created also the challenges in relation to the transport. I would like to invite now our panelists to share with us their perspectives on which have been the greatest challenges to transport and mobility. And now that we are starting restarting the economy, which are the views, your views on how the PEP can contribute to reshape the transport and urban policies for the better? As I'm going to give the floor to our distinguished panelists, please allow me to remind all of you that you have 5 minutes for your intervention. It is now my great pleasure to invite Her Excellency, Ms. Adina Bellen, European Commissioner for Transport, for her intervention and to take the floor.
Well, thank you very much. First, dear Minister, for inviting me to speak at your event about the crucial role of transport and mobility for rebuilding and recovery after the COVID crisis in cities and regions. It's clear that as we start recovering from this severe crisis, we need to build back better our mobility systems. Of course, this recovery will need a strong support from the policymakers in order to help the transport sector invest in a modern, sustainable mobility system. Besides the historic funding opportunities offered by the EU via the Recovery and Resilience Facility and via traditional multi-annual financial framework programs, we need to make sure that manufacturers and operators maintain access to sufficient private funding in order to keep investing in mobility. As we set ambitious targets for decarbonization, we need to make sure that the pledges made by cities and the entire transport sector, such as aviation, are reflected in the investment signals we are giving via our economic, national and EU policies. We know very well that past efforts have not yet sufficiently addressed societal costs like greenhouse gas emissions or poor air quality. The European Green Deal compels us to achieve 90% reduction in transport-related greenhouse gas emissions by 2050. But now we have the chance to create a clear regulatory framework to offer an economically viable pathway where the sectors become greener without hampering recovery and growth. This is exactly what our Sustainable and Smart Mobility Strategy adopted on 9th of December last year is proposing. It sets ambitious milestones for the twin transition of green and digital transformation of the transport sector. It also gives a clear view of how the transformation can be financed through the Next Generation EU, InvestEU, and the Connecting Europe facility. The inclusion of all transport modes in the taxonomy guidelines will also attract sustainable private finance for transport modernization. We set the bar very high for vehicle fleet transition, as the strategy puts forward several important milestones, including 30 million zero-emission cars and up to 3 million public charging points by 2030. The Connecting Europe facility will provide targeted financial support for those areas and projects where the market alone cannot bear the full cost. However, we count on the market generally to cover the main part of the deployment. Greening our fleets will not be enough. Effective and efficient public transport has to be the backbone of any urban and regional transport system, and should be an important component of the sustainable urban mobility plans. So our strategy announces a very ambitious deployment of such plans, sustainable plans, which will allow cities to plan their investment in public transport. Local authorities and people who live in cities expect a lot. We have a duty to encourage more livable cities where cycling and walking are safe and attractive options. Becoming sustainable also means tackling the issue of road fatalities. Around 70% of all fatal collisions happened on urban roads. So safety and sustainability need to be seen as the two sides of the same coin. As we build a transport infrastructure, we need it to be both green and safe. Of course, more needs to be done. Better last mile connections, improved multimodal options, improved information and enhanced journey planning facilities, more mobility as a service offers, more intelligent traffic management tools, so on and so forth. It would be tempting to focus exclusively on the advantage of new technologies, but that would be short-sighted. The evolution towards smart and sustainable should be inclusive and affordable to all. Rural and remote regions must be better connected. Those with reduced mobility and disabilities must have access to transport. And when it comes to zero pollution action plan, our ambition is not an absolute utopian zero. This would be irreconcilable even with life on Earth. It is meant to ensure that by 2050 pollution is reduced to levels that respect the boundaries our planet can cope with, creating an environment which is no longer harmful for health and natural ecosystems. The recovery provides an opportunity. Zero pollution should be part of national, regional, and local recovery action and should include innovations from across the board. We want to better connect our actions against pollution and make it easier for any policymaker or business owner to understand where they can best invest their political and financial capital to achieve the best results. In conclusion, and that's my last phrase, in conclusion, the ultimate goal is to secure a profitable, realistic and ambitious strengthening of the EU's green leadership while offering enhanced mobility to our citizens and businesses. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Commissioner, for your interventions and outlining the strategies for EU green plans and raising the point about the importance of sustainable and the safe transport and mobility as we are building our path towards the recovery. Now I would like to pass the floor to His Excellency, Mr. Talis Linkaits, the Minister of Transport of Latvia. Floor is yours.
Dear ladies and gentlemen, colleagues, thank you for this opportunity to address this conference and discussion on this so important topic, transport sector, in this post-COVID environment. One of the main roles of the transport sector is to ensure connectivity, including regional and mobility for people and goods. The COVID pandemic showed us how vulnerable the transport sector is and how it can be affected from a completely unexpected aspect, a global health crisis. However, real long-term effects and the impacts on national economies and transport companies have not been fully identified yet. International passenger mobility has fallen dramatically and in specific instances even stopped. Frankly, the crisis has affected every part of the transport sector and mobility. Let's start with the aviation sector. Considering the current situation, the biggest challenge the pandemic has imposed on air transport has to do with maintaining its business and recovering after the crisis is over. As the pandemic continues, it appears that the initial forecasts regarding the support needed for air transport have been too optimistic, and the decisions taken on aid to the sector prove insufficient. And we see that a major step is the forthcoming digital green certificate that will facilitate free and secure movement of European Union citizens within the European Union during the COVID pandemic. Regarding land transport, many states have imposed entry restrictions for transport operators, requiring them to present different certificates, register in numerous electronic websites, pass COVID tests, and so forth. All of the above have resulted in long queues on borders, delays in deliveries, increased amount of paperwork, additional sanitary requirements, and very limited mobility in the private sector. Further, let's not forget the maritime sector. COVID has had significant impacts on the shipping industry and seafarers. Travel restrictions imposed by governments around the world has created significant hurdles to crew changes and repatriation of seafarers. The best way to overcome any problem is to work with your partners to develop a common approach. Therefore, together with other European member states, Latvia has worked on special provisions regarding seafarers, which are now included in the Council recommendations. As the crisis began, many decisions had to be made in a hurry. However, decision of one country directly affects the actions of another country. Therefore, fast and accurate exchange of information is one of the key elements and challenges, considering that transport policies are one of the most regulated ones in the European Union, and that transport is a key element of EU single market. To fully recover from the crisis, it is fundamental to evaluate the lessons learned and thus hopefully allowing us to be better prepared if something similar were to occur again in the future. There is a long recovery ahead of us, and we need to use this time as an opportunity to see how we can improve the quality of our lives in an environmentally friendly way. As it was already mentioned, this time is also for opportunity to review processes and make relevant reforms in the transport sector in a smart, sustainable and effective way, and to use new investment opportunities such as EU Recovery and Resilience Facility. Currently, it is of utmost importance that local municipalities and communities are able to create the environment that is appealing to and serves their inhabitants, allowing them to receive services as close to home as possible and promoting opportunities related to public transport. For example, the climate component of our Recovery and Resilience Facility plan contains implementing a reform that includes greening of the public transport system in Riga agglomeration area, such as further development of cycling infrastructure, creating of mobility points, and electrification of railway public transport. The projects planned under the reform will not only contribute to meeting climate policy goals, but also contribute to reducing air pollution and encourage people to choose public instead of personal transport. We can see that the initiatives of the PEP are oriented in this direction, even though not only each country chooses to apply different approaches, but there is variety among cities as well. The overarching common goal is clear. We want to live in a safe, inclusive, and sustainable environment. An essential element of the prepared Vienna Declaration, building forward better by transforming to new, clean, safe, healthy, and inclusive mobility and transport, is that of the well-thought-out planning process going hand in hand with smart and sustainable investments. To sum up, we are not only witnessing challenging times ahead, but are living and experiencing them daily. Thus, we need to use all the resources we have to overcome this pandemic. Our task then is to come up with both short-term and long-term solutions that also won't bring us back the way it used to be, but will help us move forward with new ways of life where transport and mobility can take a different shape and grow into a well-functioning, environmentally friendly and easygoing sector. Once again, thank you for the opportunity to share my opinion and for organizing this event. I sincerely hope that next time we can meet in person.
Thank you very much, Your Excellency, Minister Linkaits, for your intervention and highlighting that in the process of reforming of the transport system, it's very important to have exchange of the information and the best practices in transport policies. So this is a very, very important one. I would like now to pass the floor to His Excellency, Mr. Nazar Nureddini, the Minister of Environment and Physical Planning of the Republic of North Macedonia.
Thank you, Mr. Berdzuli. Sehr geehrte Frau Bundesministerin, Frau Gewessler, dear colleagues, dear Commissioner, thank you for giving me the opportunity to speak on my country's behalf on this event. I will try and give you a point of view, actually, from a candidate country to the EU here, which has got different issues with which we're facing in transport and mobility. Of course, you can imagine we're a bit further behind when it comes to having a more modern infrastructure than that. In regards to the challenges we've faced over the COVID-19 pandemic and transport and mobility, I guess we all are speaking about the same things, closing borders, aviation, and relying on certain goods to be delivered to our country through rail or other manners. Of course, in our country, one of the things we've come to realize, of course, is how important the railway network is, not only to a more environmentally friendly manner of traveling and transport, however, also to be able to import and export our goods. And as you can imagine, we also all had a bit of a scare when some of the borders were closed and a lot of the primary goods were running out. And in our country, when we had the lockdowns, we did not, unfortunately, have the possibility to have a full lockdown like some of the countries or some EU members managed to. Considering that our budgetary constraints would not allow a full lockdown, we had curfews, lockdowns, police hours, which also gave us vital information and knowledge further. Actually, stated the issue of transport mobility. Having a country where the average cars that our citizens own is about 17 years old, we came to realize that as soon as the curfew hour came into effect, there was an absolute drop in the nitrogen dioxide and sulfur dioxide pollution we have. And this is something that we knew, we were actually aware of. However, though, this further stated the fact that we need to change our mobility and transport. One of the things we've actually been looking at, and we have been working over the last few years, and I can happily say that in Skopje, our capital city, we have finally agreed the loan, and we're looking to implement the new bus rapid transit system, which will improve the public transport. Because what we are actually aware of the fact that we didn't have sufficient buses, where we had to reduce the capacity and the buses over the pandemic, thereby people started using more cars, using their private cars. However, the upside of the whole thing is that, if there is an upside, sorry, is that we realize that we have to build out the cycling lanes, something we have been doing over the last 12 months. We've been dedicating space on our roads to cyclists. We have been subsidizing bicycles. We have been subsidizing electric scooters. And the positive thing is actually that we nearly had a shortage of bicycles in our country due to the fact that our citizens were so willing to change the manner of transport. And as a ministry, of course, the environment, we have identified and incorporated transport-related measures in our long-term strategy on climate, the draft law on climate action, and our recently submitted and enhanced NDC, where we have identified that mobility and transport has a significant potential for emissions reduction and achievement of our mitigation goals by applying certain actions such as the increased use of the railway, which we're focusing on investing on in the near future, the renewing the national car fleet to be an example to our citizens as well, that electric cars is the way forward, construction of the railway to our neighbors, such as Bulgaria, and especially, of course, as I said, the electrification of our transport. Now, the opportunity of this unfortunate, challenging time is how do we build environmentally friendly investments into our economic recovery plan? We need to invest in the green economy. That means we will be creating labor-intensive jobs. We will be creating a lot of new jobs. We will be stimulating an economy which needs much help, and this will actually help us recover from the recession where we find ourselves in. How do we use the PEP to contribute to reshape the transport and policies for the better? Well, we believe that the Vienna Declaration we're discussing now, the master plan for cycling promotion, is the way we can implement our reforms in our country. And this is the way it will help us to create a roadmap on a pan-European level for a country which is a candidate country, by which we make sure that we exchange, share, and use all the relevant experience, knowledge, expertise, and set the sustainable agenda that will provide guidance for each country on a national level, especially for countries such as ours, which are developing. I see that time is up. I thank you very much for the opportunity. I look forward to working together with you. Thank you.
Thank you, Minister Nureddini. It's for your very good insights about the challenges and that this crisis brought to North Macedonia, but also the opportunities and innovation that you found through this crisis. Certainly, there have been promising examples, and from your country, from many countries in the European region, that's very important to see those innovations and the promising examples to take at the scale. So I would like to pass the floor now to His Excellency, Mr. Jan Secher, the Deputy Minister of Transport of the Czech Republic. The floor is yours.
Good afternoon, dear heads of delegations, ladies and gentlemen. I would like to thank you for the opportunity to attend and contribute with two topics to this wonderful event. And one of this topic is electromobility, and second topic, a little bit about new e-commerce and logistics. The transport sector sits at the unique interaction of mobility, connectivity, land use, economic development, public health, and the city climate. And urban transport systems were under a near standstill thanks to the pandemic lockdowns, supported personal private modes of transport, walking, cycling, and individual car using in order to protect themselves from catching the virus. But for me, personally is the triumph of electric motors comes as a surprise. Many years ago, like me, to many bike livers cycling. It's a history. In 1894, Carl Benz had used bicycle technology for the vehicle in which installed engine. He called it Benz Velo. And today we are faced with the similar situation. The triumph of the electric motors comes as a surprise to many of us. Are we tired or assistive drive, too lazy to cycle, or what? The first time I experienced a slight shock was at the legendary Großglockner High Alpine Road. And a man of advanced retirement age overtook me on a classical mountain bike. It's clear the e-bike mobility is becoming increasingly popular and is expanding topographical use of bicycle from the ideal cities like Copenhagen or Amsterdam to the more hilly ones like Prague or Vienna. Urban casual biking radius in areas with sharper slopes and also longer distance in areas, or bike plus public transport in areas close to cities are achievable: electric bikes, electric scooters, and shared bikes. It's a completely new situation, and we should support it. A few words about logistics. E-commerce continue to grow rapidly due to the pandemic. Many producers in the middle of the COVID pandemic wanted to offer and sell their goods online, but are failing because of logistics. The digitalization and automatization of processes is also increasing rapidly in logistic and intralogistic, this last mile in logistic moment, due to Industry 4.0. Warehouse management system, cloud-based solution, blockchain technology, etc. are on the rise, and similar development is expected in business-to-business e-commerce. By sharing warehousing, transportation, and IT solutions, e-commerce sales will become independent of company size, and that is very important. Thank you for your attention, and greetings from Prague. Thank you.
Thank you so much, the Minister Sacher, for your intervention and the reflections. I would like to pass the floor now to our last speaker in our panel, Her Excellency, Ms. Rachel McLean, the Parliamentary Under Secretary of State in the Department of Transport of the United Kingdom. The floor is yours.
Thank you very much indeed, Dr. Berdzuli. And I'd like to start by thanking our hosts, the United Economic Commission for Europe and the World Health Organization. This isn't a time for isolation and introspection. COVID-19 has demonstrated how interconnected we all are, that we live in a world of truly global challenges. And that's why this pan-European programme is vital. It brings together countries to future-proof the transport sector, helping it to enable long-term and sustainable growth. The pandemic has forced us to rethink how we build, maintain and provide transport services. The rise in flexible working and active travel, the growing popularity of electric vehicles, together with calls for urgent action on climate change, means that we Ministers of Transport, Environment and Health here today must build back better after the pandemic. Let me give you some examples of what this means for the UK. We're supporting and championing the welcome rise in active travel during the pandemic. Cycling usage in May 2020 compared to pre-pandemic levels doubled, the only type of transport to see an increase last year. And we know that increased cycling and walking improves air quality, reduces congestion, and helps us to meet our air quality targets. That's why the UK government announced a £2 billion funding package to support active travel over 5 years, including more cycle lanes and safer junctions. Another rising trend we must contend with is flexible working. The traditional 5-day-a-week commuter model has become less appealing, and transport operators must respond. One way is by offering more flexible ticketing on public transport that recognises these shifts in working patterns. And with more time spent at home and in local communities, we need to rethink transport's role in society. It shouldn't just get us from A to B, but rather help us build vibrant and healthy high streets and communities in which people want to spend time. So let's continue to use intelligent transport systems to control traffic flows and reduce harmful emissions, whilst encouraging smarter and easier ways to use public transport, such as through mobility as a service style platforms. However, for many, the pandemic has had professional as well as personal consequences, and we sadly haven't been able to save every job. But by investing in public transport, we can disproportionately help less advantaged social groups that have been hardest hit. And that's why, for example, our national bus strategy is a huge priority, and it will invest £3 billion to transform bus provision, increasing frequency, reliability and affordability, and helping to connect people to jobs, education and to their families. And finally, we recognise the challenge of building passenger confidence back in using public transport post-pandemic, which is why we're working closely with transport operators to ensure public health measures are followed, including wearing of masks, increased ventilation and deep cleaning. And these challenges aren't unique to the UK's transport sector, and neither do we have all the answers. And that's why fora like the PEP are so important. So I do really look forward to working together so that we can all build back better.
Thank you very much, Your Excellency, and for sharing some very positive examples and how these positive examples actually can transform the transport system building forward better. I wish to thank all of the panelists, Your Excellencies, for your inspiring contributions. Reflecting on what you have said, I see that there is indeed a great opportunity to work together across the sectors to build forward better and recover from this unprecedented crisis in a way which will protect our environment, will make our lives better and those of our children healthier and happier. Thank you again, and I would like to pass now back to the chair.
Thanks a lot to our moderator, Ms. Berdzuli, and to all the panelists for sharing your inspiring stories from your countries. I think we both can relate on how the COVID-19 crisis impacted us and impacted our mobility systems, but also see the potential of change that's also in this very specific moment in time. And if I just pick up from our last intervention on bike use doubling during this time, we see very similar developments in Vienna and in many of the areas around Austria. There is an opening at this point for everyday bike use, which also has a potential to decrease mobility poverty in many areas, or enable many more people to participate in mobility also across generations. And I could very much relate, allow me this one personal note, to the example of Jan Sechter made in our panel debate. Every time and every day I cycle home from the ministry, which is an uphill struggle on my pathway home. But I think there is a lot of inspiration and examples we can take from this panel, and also that there is great interest in discussing these issues. So there's a number of ministers and other delegates that have announced their wish to intervene in this session, to contribute and to make statements on this topic. And I will be inviting the speakers, one speaker at a time, with a maximum of 3 minutes for your interventions. You've by now already gotten used to our timekeeping function in the live stream. So I am very much looking forward to elaborating these issues with many esteemed colleagues. And I'll start with Her Excellency, Ms. Teresa Ribera, Vice President of the Government and Minister for the Ecological Transition and the Demographic Challenge of Spain, who's next on the floor.
The climate emergency deserves full attention. We all need to think how we can change the way we produce, the way we consume, the way we move, in which type of cities we want to live, what air we want to breathe. This implies deep transformations in different aspects of our economy and our social behavior. It means changing many of the things we have usually done along the years, and now we know that mobility is one of the major fields where we need to take action. The municipalities, the local agenda, is quite key in this transformation. The cities can behave in a different manner. We can plan the urban agenda in a different way. We can retrofit our buildings, but we can also move in a different manner. We are changing these parameters also in the Spanish context. We have just approved a new bill on climate change and energy transition, and there are specific measures to be undertaken by the municipalities, by the local councils. We think that counting on low emissions areas in the center of each city beyond 50,000 inhabitants is very important. It could make our cities more breathable. It could allow a healthier context for any citizen living in any place. We think that this will require a further deeper investment in public transportation, but also electrifying those moves that we cannot change in a different manner than what we have been promoting for years. I think that walking, making walkable cities is absolutely key. Sustainable mobility is indeed one of the major pillars of our recovery plan. We think that we need to promote different customs in our cities and in the mobilization between cities. We need to promote the walkable cities, the concept of walkable cities. We need to promote non-motorized behavior as citizens, but also we need to improve the quality and quantity of our public transportation. And in the end, whenever we need to move in a private vehicle, we need to make available the electrified solutions. This is why we introduce all different steps, not only in the law, but also in the recovery plan, and more than that, in the acceptance of counting on a much more proactive electrified mobility all over the country. Walking and cycling is quite important. This is the main bet for our cities and for our inhabitants. And at the same time, we also need to promote different solutions of public transportation. Wherever it is possible, electrified public transportation. We need to achieve these goals, and we know that there are lots of positive things behind, including the possibility of identifying new business opportunities, new industrial solutions, new services that allow people to take different decisions on moving from one side to another.
Thanks a lot to Spain, to Teresa, for your input. I will give the floor now to Her Excellency Ms. Agne Vaiciukevičiūtė, Deputy Minister of Transport and Communications of Lithuania. The floor is yours.
Hello, dear Chair, panelists, ministers. Thank you for giving me the floor. I would like to share a Lithuanian point of view to the issues everyone is tackling in this high-level meeting. It is undeniable that COVID-19 outbreak is having a major impact on the economies and our social lives. It has inevitably affected transportation and mobility worldwide too, which in its turn has hindered the world economic development. However, we should not look back. After acknowledging the situation, the mistakes we have made, and identifying new challenges, we must respond to shaping the future of the transport sector. Our aim is to ensure a full recovery and viability of the transport sector in the medium and longer term, with any measures for the greening and digitalization of the transport sector to be based on a sustainable, efficient, and digital approach. The investment should be smart and strategic. Ensuring recovery and resilience of the transport sector will require significant investments in the coming decade. Completing the core transport networks, like the EU TNT, boosting the supply and uptake of new technologies for sustainable alternative fuels in all sectors, increasing the capacity of railways and waterborne transport and moving forward to digitalization. These are just a few challenges we should take on. However, the current challenge that our societies are facing is a need for a safe, reliable, and convenient traveling between countries. Measures to contain the pandemic have resulted in a significant reduction of passengers' mobility. Now, it is indispensable to restore the confidence of our citizens in traveling. The EU member states have already been elaborating the idea of digital green certificate. No doubt, it is a challenge to create a simple, reliable, stable, and user-friendly system our citizens can use. With digitalization will play the key role here. But we will make every effort to accomplish this task. We do believe that similar good practices can be shared, considered, and discussed among us in this forum. It is evident that long-term measures have to be introduced in the urban and public transport sectors to restore citizens' trust. However, this should not prevent countries from promoting environmentally friendly public transport accompanied by the required safety measures and standards. Eventually, digitalization and information change will be the key to a safer restart of regular activities. We fully support the notion of clean, safe, healthy, and inclusive mobility transformation, and I would like to reflect on the first recommendation of the Vienna Declaration, the implementing sustainable urban and transport planning solutions. Planning comes first, which is very true in every respect. Lithuania has started the national-wide initiative of the sustainable urban planning preparation for all the cities with a population of more than 25,000 inhabitants. 20 plans, were drafted and are ready to be implemented or are being implemented already. Our next step is the adoption of the National Cycling Plan and Sustainable Mobility Action Plan this year. Micromobility needs to be supported by better infrastructure, both digital and technical, to encourage sharing solutions such as bicycle and electric scooter sharing systems and preempt issues that might emerge in relation to charging and parking. Thank you very much for your attention and for this highly appreciated meeting and the issues everyone tackled. Thank you.
Thanks a lot for your intervention and for reminding us it's a common challenge that we're solving here, which makes me hand over to His Excellency Mr. Adrian Georgefogis, Secretary of State for Transport and Infrastructure of Romania. Your Excellency, the floor is yours.
Thank you. Your Excellency, ladies and gentlemen, first, I would like to start by saying thank you to the invitation to attend this event and for the initiative to discuss such an important topic, which has had a major impact worldwide. In order to answer today's topics of discussion, I must mention that transport is the backbone of the world economy, and this area has been severely affected by the COVID-19 pandemic. In Romania, the road transport has faced border blockages, including trucks with perishable goods, and we faced a sharp decline for a long time of international passenger road transport. There has also been a decline in demand for rail transport, and costs of measures to combat the spread of the virus have affected the budget of railway operators. The decrease of over 50% in air traffic has also affected all airports nationwide, and Romanian air operators are currently experiencing substantial losses. The process of recovery and sustainable resilience is based on the pandemic economic recovery that places the European Green Deal at the heart of the actions taken. Starting from the main goal of the Recovery and Resilience Plan for contributing to 37% to the goal of climate change and also 20% to the goal of digitalization, I would like to mention that Romania wants to develop a sustainable transport infrastructure with appropriate safety standards that will contribute to decongesting the traffic of goods and passengers while stimulating the transition to environmentally friendly transport. I also would like to add the fact that Romania is committed to preventing climate change and aims to meet its obligation to reduce carbon emissions, both at European and international level. So the investments promoted in transport infrastructure will be oriented to green and smart investments. Transport and mobility have effects on public health, so recovery measures must approach a cleaner, safer, healthier, and also more inclusive perspective. People's health and lives always prevail, and that is why it is important to focus on reducing the gap of transport infrastructure by increasing the efficiency of investments in this sector, and also the introduction of new green technologies and efficient management system in order to achieve the Vision Zero goal in the field of road safety. Another major objective of Romania in the field of transport is to reorient goods from road to rail by promoting more efficient and sustainable transport, especially rail freight. And in this regard, we would like to test hydrogen trains to achieve global carbon reduction targets. Finally, I would like also to add the fact that Romania supports the adoption of the Vienna Declaration with the first pan-European master plan for cycling promotion. And I would also like to emphasize the importance of promoting solutions for the implementation of sustainable urban mobility, including a wide range of electric urban transport systems, cycling and safe walking, and their integration into health policies, thus contributing to sustainable livelihoods and, well, as increasing the quality of all citizens' life. I would like to thank you, wish you all the best, and looking forward to meet in person as well. Thank you.
Thanks a lot, dear Excellency, also for reminding us that we are building a sustainable and good life for all people in our societies. I'd like to move to three voices from civil society, and I'm very pleased to give the floor first to William Todds, Executive Director of Transport and Environment, well-known NGO in the European context. Mr. Todds, the floor is yours.
Thank you so much, Minister. It's a really great honor to be here. I would start by saying that the pandemic has taught us many lessons. It has taught us about our vulnerability, about the importance of science, but I think most importantly has taught us about our ability as human beings to adapt and our ability to rise to new challenges. And I think we should remember those lessons as we prepare for the fight of our generation, the war on pollution and on global warming. I think we should start by remembering the science. We have 1 decade left to radically reduce CO2 emissions to keep global warming under control. And road transport is, unfortunately, the bad boy in the climate fight. So as we reopen and rebuild our economies, there are two things we need to do. The first thing we need to do is we need to follow or continue on the path that mayors across Europe have charted as they were forced by the pandemic to create more space for walking and cycling. There is a veritable cycling revolution happening on this continent. We need to hold firm as our economies reopen and as motorists and congestion returns. We need to hold the line and continue on this path. We need to be confident also, because people will perhaps at first be upset by the lack of space on the roads, but ultimately they will adapt to livable cities, and they will do more than adapt. They will love these livable cities, and this is exactly what we need as we reopen our economies. But just like we need vaccines to end and combat the pandemic, we will also need technology to stop global warming. Electric cars, trains, trucks, and buses are the vaccine that we need against global warming in the road transport sector. We can and we should phase out polluting cars from our cities, and we should do that within the next decades. We should also end the sales of polluting combustion engines on this continent. We published a study last week showing that in 6 years' time, the price of battery electric cars and vans will be the same as diesel and petrol vehicles. This is a great prospect because it means these vehicles will become accessible and affordable to the many. The European Commission is thinking about a plan to go all electric by 2035. We hope they will show courage and leadership. I want to end this short intervention by joining those of you who have said that this is not just about fighting climate change. This is not just about the environment. It is about livable cities, it's about clean air, about reduced energy and oil imports. It's about business opportunities for our companies, and it is about good jobs for our workers. So thank you very much and congratulations on this event. Greetings from Brussels, and I look forward to seeing you in person very soon. Thank you so much.
Thanks a lot, Mr. Todd. Rising to the challenge of creating lovable cities. That's a wonderful motto for us, I think. I will go on with Mr. Zafar Makhmudov, Director of the Regional Environmental Center for Central Asia. The floor is yours.
Thank you, Madam Chair. As we all heard during the opening session today and during this session, the whole world is going through these difficult times. And the global pandemic, COVID-19, has affected almost every country, city, village, and every person. The coronavirus pandemic has not avoided Central Asia either, and required urgent adaptation to new realities and immediate actions in response. The theme, human well-being and the SDGs, recovering after COVID-19 crisis, is one of the main government's priorities today. In the light of the global pandemic COVID-19, it is an immediate need for an urgent recovery of economies, the environment, education and health systems, and adaptation to the new challenges in relation to the health and education systems. At the same time, today humanity has opened up new opportunities for development, especially in the field of environment protection. So environmentalists today can act as agents of green change, and approaches such as green recovery, building back better, and risk-informed development are the important thematic areas that both governments of many countries and international organizations are working on. Let me bring your attention to our endeavors in Central Asia on green recovery. We at the Regional Environmental Center for Central Asia, we hold a series of Central Asia leadership programs since 2010. It is designed to improve leadership capacity of mid-level managers of various environmental agencies, to focus on finding solutions on sustainable development challenges across other development sectors and countries of the region. This September, we plan to organize the next round of this Central Asia Leadership Program devoted to circular economy policies and tools as drivers to green recovery and building forward better. Largely approaches used in EU are being introduced in Central Asia through these kind of leadership programs. The impact of COVID-19 pandemic on the development of Central Asia countries and Afghanistan will be discussed from the point of view of recovery of economies, environment, adaptation to the new challenges in relation to the health and education systems. So, using this opportunity, I would like to invite you to cooperate and support the next meeting of this Central Asia Leadership Program as contributors and speakers of the event in reshaping cities and regions and mobility and transport. So hope to see you also in the next meeting in person, and also would like to invite you to this leadership program. Thank you.
Thanks a lot for your inputs and for reminding us we're all agents of green change, and we'll do so even better if we collaborate. I would like to pass the floor now to Ms. Sonja Kundert-Welchli of Pro Senectute Switzerland. The floor is yours.
Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you for the opportunity to represent the perspective of elderly people. I work for the Swiss National Foundation for the Aged, Pro Senectute Switzerland, and I would like to talk the question of which factors have an impact on independent living in old age. So there is a recent survey made by Alexander Seifert in Switzerland, and this survey says that the high satisfaction with the services in the neighborhood correlates in a positive way with an independent living in old age. What does this mean? creating an age-friendly living environment is essential for aging in place to be a suggest. So an inviting environment is made by well-lit, age-friendly pavements, easy-to-spot steps with handrails, sufficient benches in suitable location. An elderly lady of the Jura Mountains told my colleague of Prosenectute Foundation that public transports are for young people. So this might be a quite radical statement, but I'm convinced that we need age-friendly public transports. We need easy access for boarding and disembarking. We need shuttle buses to center town from neighborhoods, and we have to provide safe and affordable transportation services. And last but not least, we need places to meet inside and outside, especially at the moment. Also, places to meet outside are important. And then we need accessible shops and restaurants, medical and therapeutic services in the neighborhood. Thank you for your attention, and I wish you a very inspiring conference. Thank you.
Thanks a lot. Thanks a lot for giving us this perspective on inclusive mobility, and that inclusive mobility means much more than just modes of transport. I am at the end of my speakers list, and as you can notice by my a bit more elaborate interventions in between speakers, we are perfectly in time. So before I conclude this panel 1 and move over to panel 2, let me say a big thank you to all of you who helped me with the timekeeping in this extraordinary international multilingual setting with a wide area of issues that we're discussing here. So I will then conclude this first round of discussions, but without any further ado, move to the second panel debate of today, which is on the issue of climate neutrality, the challenge for green, safe and healthy mobility. I think it basically picks up from where our first round of interventions left us. And I would like to start this debate again with an excellent keynote speaker, Hans Breunings, Executive Director of the European Environment Agency, long-standing observer of European politics, and very well suited to give us this initial overview of where do we need to look at if we are aware that mobility and the transformation in mobility that we face towards climate neutrality is and remains our biggest challenge in the field. Mr. Breunings, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Minister, ladies and gentlemen, Excellencies. It's a real pleasure to be with you today to discuss the really important topic of the link between a transition that we need in the transport system and the fundamental challenge of climate change that we have. I will shed some light on the topic based on recent work that we have done in the European Environment Agency together with the colleagues in the member countries of the EEA, of course. Next slide, please. To frame the challenge rather simply is that for the moment, if we look at 1990, we are in Europe meeting our objectives of reducing greenhouse gas emissions. But if we look at climate neutrality towards 2050 and the 55% of reductions by 2030, then we have a very serious challenge. And the challenge is twofold. Yes, click please. On the one hand, we will have to increase the rate of greenhouse gas emission reductions by a factor 2.7 from now towards 2050 compared to the last 3 decades. That is very significant, of course. Click. That means that we will have to speed up and scale up any type of solutions that will be needed for that. And this is impossible under current policy. So in other words, we will need a true paradigm shift. Next slide. In order to conceptualize and bring knowledge to policies on how that is feasible, with the European Environment Agency, we have been working on what is called the term reporting, and that is transport and environment reporting mechanism with the member states. And we have been looking at technological breakthroughs like battery electric vehicles and the role they could play. We've been looking at the connections between different modes of transport and how that so-called last kilometer to get where you have to be and to leave from home can be bridged. And recently, we have also compared train, rail to planes when it comes to passenger and goods and how we transport them. So we have this systemic view on how we have to think about this transition in light of climate change objectives. Next slide. What is absolutely clear is that any scenario that is compliant with the well below 2 degrees or the 1.5 degree desired scenario under the Paris Agreement is absolutely impossible without fundamentally addressing the emissions from transport. About 1/4 of the global carbon emissions are coming from transport. And when we look at road transport, that represents 3/4 of those transport emissions, which is, of course, one of the reasons why under the European Green Deal, we have to strive for about 90% reduction of greenhouse gas emissions by 2050 in the transport sector. Again, this is impossible without a fundamental set of systemic changes in the transport system. Next slide. I can easily illustrate that by the current evolution, which from 1990 to today looks at the transport sector as the only sector in the economy that has been adding emissions. And the blue is, of course, road transport. Then we've got air transport and maritime transport, and we see all 3 of them increase since 1990. Now, if you look at where we ought to be in total emissions for the sector by 2050 under the Green Deal ambitions, that's where the blue arrow is. You can tell that in the next 3 decades, compared to the previous 3 decades, we have to make a really radical change. Next slide. And when it comes down to challenges, one of the first challenges is, of course, the challenge on fuels. If you look at fossil fuels in the current transport system of the EU 27, fossil fuels still account for 92% of transport energy consumption in the EU. That is below the target of the EU at the moment. And if you look at the increase here in the non-fossil fuels, well, that is still a very slow increase from a rather insignificant level to a less insignificant level, but not nearly where we should be. So speeding up and scaling up is essential. Next slide. But it's more than fuels. It's also an efficiency challenge, and that means making the right choices. On the left here, you see the greenhouse gas emissions per passenger kilometer, and passenger flights clearly have the highest emissions. Passenger trains clearly have the lowest emissions. Collective transport modes like buses and coaches are also rather low. But look at passenger cars. Under the current energy mix and the current car use in the EU, they really have high emissions per passenger kilometer, even compared to passenger flights. Now, this is, of course, not a static set of assessments. As the mix changes towards battery electric vehicles or hydrogen vehicles, for example, we could end up with a rather different numbers here. When we look at tons per kilometer for freight, again, air cargo there is by far the most taxing form of transport. If we then look at maritime shipping and rail, but also at inland waterways, it is clear where the modal shift should take place if we dramatically want to see a decrease in the emissions. Next slide, please. But it's not only that. It's not only the efficiency, it's not only the fuels, it's also the personal mobility challenge day to day that we face as citizens of Europe. And that means that we need to reflect on what is generating mobility flows, where we live, where we work, how those two are connected, whether we have to be there or not. Think of the teleworking revolution that we've seen under, of course, obligation the last year. It's motivation, values that we have, the costing of it, the framework of rules surrounding our mobility choices, and then the sort of quality of the supply, the availability that is there. So creating the conditions for the change that is needed is absolutely essential, and that means connecting personal choices to a collective set of measures and settings and investments as well. Next slide. And it also means escaping from what we call lock-ins in the transport system. We see an increased vehicle ownership in Europe. What is also connected to automobile-oriented transport planning, with reduced travel options. Think of the night trains in Europe, which we've seen crumble over the last couple of decades. They seem to be coming back, but that is rather significant. Alternative modes that tend to be stigmatized as for lower income people, or they have a sort of inconvenience stigma to them. Suburbanization and degraded cities that lead to this. Land use planning that is not exactly stimulating collective mobility choices, generous parking supply in many places at very low cost, and then of course dispersed development patterns across countries and between regions. So the whole system locks us in, you could say, to individual vehicle ownership, and that also includes tax systems in a number of countries that are not terribly helpful. So reflecting on where these lock-ins are and breaking through them is absolutely essential. Next slide. That means overall that we cannot think about climate neutrality in 2050 without a fundamental transition in the transport system. A transition in the transport system is not only about fuels and technology, it is also about facilitating choices and stimulating people with a number of policies and investments to make those choices. And finally, this needs to be based on a really strong vision in public policy making about a sustainable and integrated future. And that is, of course, what is at the essence of the Vienna Declaration that is stimulating this type of future. So we are happy as a European Environment Agency to be a knowledge partner in this change, and we wish you good luck with the further implementation and discussions around the topic. Thank you very much.
Thanks a lot to Hans Breunings. I think you've definitely risen to the challenge of alerting us to the magnitude of the challenge that we have ahead of us. And now we'll discuss on a ministerial panel again in the format as we've previously seen it, the possible building blocks of solutions. You mentioned, for example, also the night train challenge, and I'm very happy to announce that Austria is really working hard on really bringing back this wonderful mode of mobility in Europe. In many new places also. But before I give the floor to our moderator, the next session will be moderated by Marco Kainer, Director of the UNECE Environment Division, who will also introduce us in more depth to this panel debate and its questions, I'd like to, I have the pleasure to introduce the excellencies on this panel. I start with Sakia Katabi, Minister for Climate, Environment, Sustainable Development and Green Deal of Belgium. I move to Ms. Nino Tandilashvili, the Deputy Minister of Environment of Georgia. Mr. Eduardo Rodrigues e Pinheiro, Secretary of State for Mobility of Portugal, and very warm welcome to Professor Dirk Messner, the President of the German Environment Agency. I will now pass the floor to Marco Kreiner, who will lead us through this panel of how we rise to the challenge of green, safe, and healthy mobility in the age of moving to climate neutrality. Mr. Kreiner, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Excellency Minister Gewessler. Good afternoon, everyone. It's my pleasure to be the moderator. It's a privilege and an honor to have such a rich panel in front of me. And I also want to thank Hans for setting the scene. If we look around, clearly we can witness that the transport sector's contribution to achieving the climate targets is still unsatisfactory. That has been said several times. In contrast to other sectors, such as energy and buildings, CO2 emissions have hardly fallen since the basic year 1990 throughout the region. And we have even seen that these emissions have increased over the past years. So that's why enormous efforts are needed if the greenhouse gas emissions that are generated by transport are to decrease in the coming years. Now, it's been said, achieving climate neutrality in transport is the challenge. The sector is to make, as Hans said, fundamental shifts to become green, healthy, and sustainable. Now, this is even exacerbated in this COVID-19 phase we are in. And clearly, we have now the big goal to build back better, to kickstart a green economy, a circular economy, to which the transport sector can contribute. And how it can do that, that is the topic of this panel. Now, the panelists who were already introduced by Her Excellency Minister Gewessler have received two main questions. The first one being, what are the key priorities for joint action regarding climate neutrality and green and healthy transport? And of course, how do you see the role of the PEP? And now it's my pleasure to hand over the floor to Ms. Sakia Katabi from Belgium. Excellency, the floor is yours.
Je vous remercie beaucoup. D'abord, je voudrais remercier vos messieurs.
I would like to thank you very much. I would like to thank the Minister for inviting me and for giving me the opportunity to share my thoughts with you. This is an exchange which is very inspiring and which is absolutely necessary. Transport simply must become more environmentally friendly. I'm also very happy to see Mr. Bruynings, and his analyses are always very important for the public debate and an important contribution to public debate. So mobility is one of the main challenges for our society, and it also has many aspects outside mobility. Indeed,
Il y a aussi l'enjeu économique.
Besides the environmental and the health aspect, there is also an economic challenge aspect, which is generated by this policy, but which also poses a challenge for our companies, which are taxed through the costs of mobility. This is why there is a need for mobility for everyone. In Belgium, emissions of greenhouse gases from transport have increased by 25% in the last 30 years. So these are really alarming figures.
Des milliers de décès prématurés.
Particularly, they are causing cardiovascular and lung diseases. All this is caused by fossil fuel emissions. Now, as far as environmental protection is concerned, 7,600 people have died as a result of dust in Antwerp alone. So, as Minister for Sustainable Development, it is very important for me to focus attention on these figures. There are 11 environmental protection cities which have integrated this approach into their policies, and they want to pursue these policies with a lot of attention until 2030. So we need to get away from fossil fuels in order to improve the air quality on the one hand. On the other hand, however, you can also use the time which you use for transport at all levels. You need to sensitize, raise awareness of people, both in terms of business and economics and in terms of environment. So this is the necessity of this challenge. And I can also tell you that this requires a paradigm change, a paradigm leap. So we need to accompany these changes, and for us politicians, it's very important to find green alternatives for these motor vehicles, and we need to replace the traditional question of when do I have to leave from home in order to avoid being stuck in traffic jams and me not being dependent on looking for a parking space at my destination. So this means we need to find solutions of alternatives to motor vehicles. Also, Georges Choutinet, who is Minister for Mobility, he's the minister I will cooperate with in order to deal with all influence factors, to also the Belgium's position, but also I want to boost those companies that are also involved to reorient themselves. Since the health crisis, the railways have shown how resilient they are and how much they can resist the pandemic.
Du rail afin d'en faire la colonne vertébrale.
In order to promote public transport services and alternative transport services. And this is not possible without railways, both for passenger and for freight transport. So we will invest a lot into rail traffic. So all studies confirm us in doing that. And also the European Environmental Agency confirms us that rail is the most environmental friendly alternative in terms of passenger transport when it comes to greenhouse gas emissions. We want to strengthen rail transport in our country as compared to other modes of transport, also over long distances. You've also mentioned night trains. So our foreign partners are a very important lever, and the rail is a very important driver for environmentally friendly traffic or transport. So 3% of that comes back into our economy. Always, we need to, in coordination with other countries and regions, we need to take constant measures. That is, to reduce the sale of cars that do no longer meet environmental standards. We need to increase and improve the infrastructure for e-vehicles with with all different mobility actors. And we also need to promote bus and taxi transport. We also need to form alliances with associations to select those transport modes that suits most groups of clients most. So also, tax-wise, we need to create benefits to make sure that people who take the bike get also something back. This is also very important for the purpose of a CO2-free transport policy. This must be at the focus of our transport policy, and also for the purpose of reducing environmental pollution. We need to introduce equal policies for the sake of the health of our societies and our whole planet. So, if this transition to a better transport policy is to become better, then we need to meet our citizens' demand and live up to the needs. Thank you very much, and I'm looking forward to many other invitations.
Thank you so much, Dear Excellency, Minister Katabi. I'm impressed by your clear view on the need to shift the paradigm and to take action in Belgium. You highlighted the role of the railways, and it's encouraging to see how you even strengthen this means of public transport. Thank you so much for your excellent example. With this, I would like to continue with our next panelist, Ms. Nino Tandilashvili, the Deputy Minister for Environment and Agriculture from Georgia. Excellency, the floor is yours.
Thank you, dear Marco. Thank you. It is my pleasure to participate in today's meeting. Excellencies, distinguished delegates, ladies and gentlemen, let me firstly excuse on behalf of the Minister Davitashvili, as he could not participate today. He had an urgent meeting with the Prime Minister, so it is my pleasure that I'm representing him at the meeting. Let me start with the expression of gratitude towards our host, the Government of Austria, and of course, the Pan-European Programme Secretariat for a great spirit of cooperation to prepare and organize the 5th high-level meeting on transport, health and environment. First, I would like to highlight that when we are talking about the climate change and healthy transport, which are or have to be one of the main government agendas for all the countries around the world, I think that key priorities for joint actions should be the active sharing of the best practices and provision of support each other, as well properly considering existing capacities and specific assistance needs. As for the joint actions at the national level, I would like to mention the establishment of a multi-sectoral climate change council of Georgia, aiming at ensuring the efficient implementation of UN Framework Convention on Climate Change, the Kyoto Protocol, the Paris Agreement in Georgia. The Council has endorsed Georgia's updated nationally determined contribution, new NDC, which recently has been approved by the government of Georgia and has submitted to the UNFCCC Secretariat. Hereby, let me also mention the recently approved other main documents as the tools for NDC implementation, the 2030 Climate Change Strategy and 2021-2023 Climate Action Plan. The updated NDC sets, among others, sectoral targets for the achievement of which the joint action of different stakeholders is strongly required. By 2030, Georgia plans to mitigate the greenhouse gas emissions from the transport sector by 15% from the reference level. It should be noted that transport is the biggest emitter sector for Georgia, accounting for around 24% of national greenhouse gas emissions. We fully realize that joint efforts should be strived towards attaining climate neutrality and developing green and healthy transport. And therefore, the government of Georgia sets the main priority directions on its low-emission development pathway. Let me also refer to the Pan-European program, which we see as the exact mechanism for joint action in two ways: for coordinating and agreed activities among the three sectors, transport, health and environment on one hand, and between the countries in the Pan-European region on the other. The main spirit of the Pan-European program is that the efforts and activities to contribute to the advancement of three sectors, such as development of green and healthy transport, contribute to the improvement of the human health and protect the environment, should be implemented jointly. Let me point out the air quality issue in urban areas. That is one of the main concerns for Georgia and throughout the region as well, since mobile sources are responsible for air pollution that adversely affects human health. Therefore, another important role of the Pan-European program is to consolidate intersectoral efforts to promote green and healthy transport that will be beneficial not only for climate change mitigation, but for air quality as well. In this regard, I would like to highlight the good experience that we gained during the preparation and implementation of air quality plans in Georgia for two large cities, Tbilisi and Rustavi. In particular, the plan for capital city of Tbilisi was developed with an active coordination and cooperation of all stakeholders and all entities related to transport, health and environment. Jointly elaborated activities were presented in the document aimed at greening of transport, improving air quality and associated health impact assessment. One of the main aspects of this plan is the change vision towards urban transport development. Namely, the whole focus was towards the driver's comfort in the past. Currently, development of walking, cycling and public transport infrastructure has become the first priority. Nowadays, we cannot avoid referring to the COVID-19 pandemic that caused vast changes in our lives, along with drastic economic challenges. Therefore, the need for cooperation and strengthening mutual collaboration has become more important and crucial than ever. The Pan-European program is one of the best instruments of joint actions with its guidance and strong links between transport and the environmental sectors, supports establishing strict stability and finding effective ways to make out a balance between them and explore further opportunities in the existing situation. Let me conclude and express my strong belief that with the joint actions under the Pan-European program, we will be able to perform in an impactful manner in the Pan-European region. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you, Nino. Thank you, Excellency. Many thanks for pointing out the importance of collaboration among various sectors in order to make progress, and also about highlighting the importance, again, as your previous speaker, on the air quality in urban centers. I would like to continue now with Mr. Eduardo Rodrigues Pinheiro. He's the Secretary of State for Mobility in Portugal. Excellency, the floor is yours.
Thank you. Thank you very much for the invitation. It's a very pleasure. And let me start by saying that PEP is very important because it brings together, as has been said, transport, environmental and health concerns. And those are very important issues nowadays. We are living in a climate emergency, but at the same time, we must face a pandemic. And even before COVID-19, we all recognized the link or the links between environment and human health. Secondly, we are aware that mobility plays an essential role in our daily lives as it connects people, ensures access to all sorts of services, and allows the supply of goods. But as we all know, the transport sector has huge negative impacts in our health and on the environment. Noise, air pollution, greenhouse gas emissions, and so on. And I would like to stress that in 2016, Portugal committed itself to achieve carbon neutrality by 2050, and we cannot ignore that the transport sector in Portugal, as in Europe, accounts for roughly 24-25% of greenhouse gas emissions. So if you want to fight climate change and to improve our health, that must change. And as we all know, climate change has no boundaries. It is a global threat, and promoting our joint action is one of the more reliable processes by which we can ensure that all countries will achieve their own targets. In Portugal, as in most of the European countries, as has been said, we have experienced decades of growing private car use and shrinking public transport shares. So in the last 5 years, the Portuguese government policies have been focused on public transport, which in our view must be the backbone of a sustainable mobility system. In this regard, our approach has been to promote better management practices, to improve services, to decarbonize the fleets, and to ensure affordability. It's very important to be affordable. In 2019, we approved a support program called PART. It's a fare reduction program which represents a silent but steady revolution in public transport. This program has reduced public transport fares throughout the country in a significant manner. As a result, in 1 year only, PART increased ridership by 18% in the Lisbon metropolitan area alone. Of course, with the pandemic, it is difficult to keep that figures, but still a success. And at the same time, we believe that active modes like walking and cycling can make a difference. I'm sure that cycling should be an equal partner in the mobility system. We recognize the potential of bicycles to achieve a sustainable mobility ecosystem, and it is important for environmental protection as well as regarding health concerns. I want to highlight that Portugal is the biggest European bicycle producer. This is significant for our economy, but also entails a bigger responsibility in promoting cycling mobility. We have to admit that Portugal took some time to recognize the potential of cycling as a real mobility alternative. We approved our national strategy for active cycling mobility in 2019. This is a public policy guidance tool with ambitious goals until 2030. Now, in 2021, we are beginning to see the results. Portugal's main cities like Lisbon are becoming more bike-friendly. People are looking at this way of moving around, and we are very optimistic. But however, there is still a long way to go, and PEP plays a very important role because it allows us to share and learn among all the partners. At this moment, experts from different countries are creating and testing new solutions to promote green and healthy transport that range from changing the way we plan our cities to financing public transport or promoting the rediscovery of the importance of walking and cycling. The PEP should be able to provide a stage for building a common vision and methodological guidance to apply those different solutions. We must ensure that the best solutions, the best practices are quickly shared so they can be implemented in the different countries and regions. And so thank you for your attention.
Thank you so much for sharing your knowledge and your experience and to highlight your expectations, what the PEP can do. And mainly I'm grateful that you emphasize so clearly on bicycles and on cyclings. That has always been at the heart of the PEP, and I'm sure that your intervention will even strengthen that portfolio. Now I would like to continue with our next speaker from Germany, Dr. Dirk Messner. He's the president of the German Environment Agency. Mr. Messner.
Yeah. Sehr geehrte Frau Ministerin Gewessler, dear Minister
Dear Minister Gewessler, dear Mrs. Katami, Exzellenzen.
I would like to make one pre-remark, and then I'm going to focus on 3 specific ideas. My pre-remark is focused on the urgency issue, which has been mentioned by Hans Breunings and several other speakers. We are pushing for deep transformation and deep and rapid change.
And therefore, we need very good arguments to do so, because this is challenging and this is something which we need to reflect upon very, very focused. And my argument towards urgency is that if I would have spoken to you only 5 years ago, I would have argued that beyond 3.5 degrees global warming, we are running into the area of tipping points in the Earth system, destabilization processes in the Earth system. The models and the Earth system sciences today shows us that already around 2 degrees, these tipping points are very, very nearby. So this is for me the strongest argument to move towards deep transformation. And as others argued, also in Germany, the transport sector is a challenging sector. We have been making progress with decarbonization in Germany in the energy sector, in the industry, but we are challenged in the car industry, in the mobility sector, the transport sector. We have seen stagnation of emissions during the last 20, 30 years in this sector in Germany, therefore bringing the emissions rapidly down towards 2030, halving the emissions, and going towards climate neutrality by 2045. This is a huge process. And Germany, as you know, has a large car industry. Therefore, we need to be part of the solution, of course, but currently with our car industry, we're also part of the problem. So this has been my pre-remark. It's about urgency, and this is a challenging sector in Germany and across Europe. So let's focus on my 3 main points which I wanted to make regarding mobility in cities and decarbonization. My first point is very simple. My first point is that to move towards carbon neutrality, towards zero emissions in 2045, 2050, electrification of vehicles, electrification of passenger vehicles is the most important and viable approach to reduce greenhouse gas emissions in this sector. All our studies are showing that direct use of renewable electricity is the most efficient post-fossil energy supply option for road transport. And all our studies also show that battery electric cars are 4 to 6 times more energy efficient than cars with combustion engines being run by e-fuels. So electrification of our mobility system based on renewable energies, this is option number 1, and this is our highest priority. I think that between 2030 and 2035, we should sold the last non-electric cars in our markets. So we need to move out of fossil-driven cars. My second idea is even more far-reaching, because my second idea is about the mobility system itself. To reduce resource consumption in this sector and to go towards zero emissions in the transport sector, we do not only need to think about electrifying the system and electrifying our cars, we need to think about this mobility system itself. And several of the speakers already mentioned this point. And our German Environmental Agency has made a very clear recommendation in this regard. We are suggesting to reduce urban car density to 150 cars per 1,000 inhabitants. You might know, and probably you do know, that in our large cities in Europe, there is a 1 car for every 2-3 people ratio. So we suggest to bring this ratio down radically to 150 cars by 1,000 inhabitants. To make this happen, obviously, investments are necessary, because we need to shape and reshape the mobility system itself. Using digital tools to make public and shared mobility more attractive is number 1. Number 2 is investment in public transport, obviously, because people need to move in the city, but they should move not by their own private cars, but much more in public sector systems. So investments in this field are obviously needed. And then one of my pre-speakers here mentioned active modes of transportation, walking and cycling. And in this regard, we can learn from Oslo, we can learn from Stockholm, Copenhagen, Utrecht. We in Germany are not so strong in this field. So investing in a new infrastructure in the transport sector, moving away from cars towards these different types of mobility, this is my suggestion number 2. My idea number 3 is also very simple. The interesting thing looking at mobility systems in cities is that when we talk about mobility system in cities, we can link carbon neutrality and climate protection with better life for people. And this has two aspects. The first aspect is that if we go down in the numbers of cars, we can create more public spaces. We can create green spaces. We can reduce noise. We can reduce the level of contamination of air. So this is all related to quality of life and well-being. So climate neutrality and well-being of people could be combined. And the second aspect is a justice aspect, a just transition in the transport sector. We all know that people in low income, with low income, tend to be more affected by transport-related air pollutants and noise than those who are socially better off. So this is a justice issue. And this implies that we are arguing for combining climate protection and green economy aspects in the transport sector with well-being approaches and justice issues, because we think that we have co-benefits here which we can mobilize. And we also think that if we communicate climate protection together with well-being aspects and just transition, we do have even better arguments to move towards deep transformation processes. I thank you for your patience.
Well, thank you, Mr. Mesner. It was a pleasure listening to you. I think we are all inspired by your visionary words and by the ambition that Germany is putting into that, and you yourself with all these ideas. I wish you a lot of success with it. I think that's the right way how to go into future. Now, as time is running, we need to move on. Now to Switzerland, Mr. Gary Balmer, the Vice Director and Head of Policy Division of the Federal Office of Transport. Mr. Balmer, please.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Keiner. Dear Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, thank you for the opportunity to address these important questions of climate neutrality with a focus on transport. In order to achieve our goal in Switzerland of net zero by 2050, massive efforts are necessary in three fields. These are avoiding, shifting, improving. I'd like to focus on shifting, but let me first say a few words about avoiding mobility. Mobility is increasing massively. In Switzerland, models suggest a 50% increase on average by 2040, and everybody agrees that mobility creates CO2 emissions, so we should start with avoiding a massive growth of mobility. And one of the keys to this is spatial planning. That's why we have spatial planning procedures at local, regional, national level that take into account the interactions with mobility. This can help to reduce, for example, commuting. That accounts for a considerable amount of traffic. A very important factor for decarbonizing transport is shifting mobility from individual motorized mobility to CO2 efficient services. Public transport, for example, can be efficient. That's why Switzerland will continue to push public transport as a backbone of our mobility system by heavily investing in railway infrastructure. But public transport can only be efficient if it's heavily used. Almost empty buses or trains are not efficient. We have experienced that that just increasing public transport services is not sufficient. That's why capacity utilization for us is a key point in shifting to CO2 efficient services. Today in Switzerland, the existing capacity of public transport on average is only used by 30%. And the occupation of a car is as low as 1.2 persons, which is quite comparable to public transport. That's why we also need to figure out how to better use our existing capacity to fulfill today's and the future needs for mobility. We think that's one of the most important levers. One way we try to use this lever is by fostering multimodal mobility. We want to offer people the opportunity to be flexible, but without their own car. We want to facilitate choices, just as Mr. Bröning has pointed it out a few minutes ago. Therefore, we want to connect existing services like public transport, taxis, sharing services on a physical, but also on a digital level. In order to do this on a digital level, we need to make data about these services available. We need to consider data as an infrastructure for mobility, because without data, mobility will not work, not today, even less tomorrow. And because data becomes an infrastructure for mobility, public authorities have to start playing their role and make data available, just as they make roads and railways available for mobility. In Switzerland, we are working on creating a national data infrastructure for mobility as a free governmental service. And of course, if talking about shifting to CO2 efficient modes of transport, we definitely should mention active non-motorized mobility and cycling. Swiss people voted recently to promote these modes of transport, and we are working on an act to ensure that cyclists' concerns are given equal consideration on the design of mobility planning and implementation. But modal shift is not only important for passenger transport, but also for freight transport. And that's where Switzerland already has a long history with a variety of measures taken, among them the construction of the new railway link across the Alps with the base tunnels to shift freight transport from road to rail. Let me come to the last of the three factors, that's improve. We need to make sure that the vehicles used to provide efficient mobility services have very low life cycle emissions of CO2. But that's a factor that has already been mentioned several times today, so I won't go into details for this. Now, what can be the role of the PEP in this context? Climate challenge definitely doesn't stop at borders. Therefore, an international exchange on goals, views, best practices is crucial if we want to make progress. And that's exactly what the PEP can do, interlinking different sectors and offering an excellent platform for exchange. And I'm very grateful that the PEP has played this role in the past and will play it in the future. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you, Mr. Balmer. I am very grateful for your contribution because everything should start with avoiding mobility if it's avoidable, if it's not needed. And also you mentioned the connecting of the different modes. That's of utmost importance. And of course, data, which is key for the future of transportation. Thank you so much. And with this, we come to our last speaker, Mr. Pere Calvet Todera, the Director General and Ferrocarrils de la Generalitat de Catalunya, and he's also the President of the International Association of Public Transport. We are looking forward to listen to you.
Bonjour, Ministre, Excellences, Mesdames et Messieurs. C'est un plaisir.
Ministers, Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen. So for me, it is a great pleasure to participate in this meeting. Also, we are talking about the cooperation in this very important field of transport and environment. 2021 is a very crucial year after what happened unexpectedly in 2020. We are facing a global pandemic, which is still very active in some countries, and we're also facing global warming. If we want to then follow up on what is needed for global warming, to fight global warming and the pandemic, we must, of course, strengthen the capacities of our societies to fight all these effects, including that of global warming. We must also then change completely our habits and strengthen the use of public transport. Public transport has kept up mobility in many countries in these very difficult situations. We have avoided the paralysis of transport while we were fighting for our health. We need to follow up on the vaccination strategy and then the business will recover. We must, of course, all fight together in order to make this growth happen, and we must, of course, also follow up on what nations have decided in the Paris Accords. The decisions of on public transport not only allows green transport, but also strengthen the economy, and we then classify persons and must use the chances offered by economic and social policies. The challenges today are cannot just be overcome without this very clear decision, and that, of course, includes social as well as environmental policies. We must avoid the traps that can be avoided, and we must find solutions to environmental and social challenges and implement public transport. We must, of course, reduce emissions and provide equitable access to public transport. We must then also foster the growth of private transport with zero emissions as soon as possible, decarbonize, must offer more public transport of better quality. We must then, of course, also cut back on emissions and offer alternatives such as electric vehicles. The decisions taken by the governments and multinational organizations during the pandemic are decisive for implementing the decisions we're taking. These urgent decisions must focus on strengthening public transport as well as their direct impact on the reduction of emissions. As a consequence, we will then, of course, kick off this green revolution that has been defined by the Paris Accords. We must look for a sustainable revolution on the global level. When everything is in place, we can then also strengthen the local markets, but at the same time also decarbonize and strengthen the public transport in the various municipalities. If not, we will pay a high price. We must make all these investments supported by stable investments that also come from the just pricing of the various facilities. Of course, strengthening public transport will then bring out the best of everything, and we must, of course, then source finances from public and private funds. We must also have this important transition where we can find all these integrative, green and healthy aspects. We must come up with a pan-European global strategy. And what is also very important is that actors duly communicate. We must all cooperate together so that we can then jointly build this pillar for a better environment, for more environmentally friendly cities. We are very grateful that we can continue this very fruitful and successful cooperation. Thank you very much for the invitation.
Thank you so much, Director. Please allow me for a very short wrap-up since the time is running. We have seen that the current pandemic is an additional obstacle to achieve carbon neutrality in transport, but we can also see it as a chance to kickstart the urgent needed transformation, the deep transformation, the shift of paradigm. And we have heard a lot of good examples and starting points. It stems from the resilience of the railway system that we have heard, but also, of course, on the more organizational side of first avoiding the mobility, and then if we cannot avoid it, to reduce the number of cars to the maximum or the minimum that is possible. But also, if the traffic we cannot avoid should be as carbon neutral as possible, electric, use of bicycles, use of public transport. And it should be safe and inclusive, we also heard. The access should be equitable. And all that could be could be in a European, pan-European strategy under the roof of the PEP. And yes, of course, the PEP is already going into that direction. All this ambition also was very positive for me to listen to. 2050, maybe that's a little bit too far from now. We should be even more ambitious, because in 2050 I will be 87 years old and I would like to have a sustainable future before that. So please, I ask all to even be more ambitious with that, and I think the PEP is the right place to be more ambitious and to come to concrete results. Thank you so much. It was a pleasure to moderate this panel, and I would like to hand back to His Excellency, Her Excellency, Minister Gewessler. Thank you.
Thanks a lot to our moderator, Mr. Keynote, for also concluding and wrapping up the panel debate in a very concise manner. Also on these highly relevant issues, we have a number of ministers who informed us that they would like to intervene and have told us about their wish to make a statement. Again, we'll have a time limit of 3 minutes. I can already announce now there will be one intervention by video, which will be a little longer. But I alert everybody else to please stick to the time so we can all finish within our schedule. Again, I'll be inviting speakers one at a time, and I will start with His Excellency, Mr. Skrekas Kostas, Minister of Environment and Energy of Greece.
Well, good evening, ladies and gentlemen, Your Excellencies, dear colleagues. It is with great pleasure and honor that I'm participating to the 5th high-level ministerial meeting on transport, health and environment organized by the United Nations Economic Commission for Europe and the government of Austria. So congratulations for the initiative and for this organizing this event. Now the opportunity given by this meeting to exchange experiences, learn from each other and develop compatible approaches to pursue our common goals is of great importance and value to us. Let me say that Greece supports a very ambitious climate policy. It is the only way forward. Therefore, to this end, through our National Energy and Climate Plan, we have already set a very ambitious national goal of 56% greenhouse gas emissions reduction by 2030 compared to 2005 levels. And to achieve this goal, we are already implementing very bold measures. For instance, we have planned to phase out all lignite power plants by 2023, apart from one, which will remain in operation. And according to the latest announcements by the Public Power Corporation, it will be converted into a gas power plant by 2025. Therefore, it will eventually switch to natural gas that will serve as a transitional fuel. Furthermore, we have adopted economy-wide policies and measures covering all related sectors that can lead to significant greenhouse gas emissions, including further promoting renewable energy sources, energy efficiency, especially in the building sector. We have already planned a huge innovation wave, also financed by the RRF. Of course, electromobility that presents great benefits, not only in terms of reduction of CO2 emissions, but as regards air pollution. So we aim at drastically decarbonizing the sector by achieving at least 30% share of electric passenger vehicles in new registrations in 2030, and thus ensuring coherence with our national transport plan. Now, obviously, our national plan for energy and climate will be revised to reflect the new targets of 55% reduction following the new European climate law. We are also planning the adoption of a national climate law to set the course for full decarbonization by 2050 and set the right policies to achieve this in a cost-efficient manner. Last but not least, we are strongly promoting other related tools, such as projects for urban climate neutrality, active mobility and accessibility in urban areas, sustainable urban mobility plans, while we are also promoting the elaboration and adoption of a national cycling master plans. Thank you again, and congratulations for the great organization of this event.
Thanks a lot for your valuable input to this debate. I now move over to a video statement from His Excellency Mr. Enrico Giovannini, Minister for Sustainable Mobility and Infrastructure of Italy.
Dear Minister Gewessler, dear Minister Mückstein, and dear Executive Secretary Mrs. Algayerova, dear colleagues and participants, thank you very much for the organization of this event and for the invitation. It's an honor and a pleasure to address such an esteemed public on this very important topic. The COVID-19 pandemic has highlighted the close relationship between the environment, economies, and people. It has highlighted the risks to the foundations of human well-being and the consequential systemic impacts on the economy and society. It has revealed the importance of early, decisive, multilateral action to address these risks and build resilience. Regions and cities differ hugely in greenhouse gas emissions and vulnerability to climate change. Effective multi-level governance system and coordination mechanisms are needed to align regional and local investments programming with national and international targets. There is a strong need to work across levels of government, territorial scales, policy sectors, and this is what in Italy we are trying to do in the context of the National Plan for Recovery and Resilience. One major factor today that needs to be addressed is the social and territorial dimension of climate change in terms of different impacts of climate change on societies and territories, and consequently the policies which need to be implemented in order to address them. This is particularly true for countries that have very large territorial divides like Italy, but actually is a problem that concerns all countries. And I remember when, as a chief statistician of the OECD, we launched a program to develop territorial statistics with data at regional and provincial level, exactly to understand the relationships between economic, social and environmental phenomena, an approach that now is very widely disseminated and used all over the world. We need indeed policies to help our societies to go through the ecological transition, but also the digital transition, which at the end of the day means overall economic and social transition. Of course, this transition must be just. Climate action is an extraordinary opportunity for our economies, but also a risk. If we do not coordinate policies, if we do not design policies very carefully in order to take our societies towards the transition and throughout the transition, we risk that the social disruptions will block the entire transition. And this is especially true because with the Recovery and Resilience Plan, several countries will run huge investment programs. And without the support of local communities, we face the risk of having the transition blocked. The 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development, adopted by all countries in the UN in 2015, represent a fantastic tool in order to have a comprehensive approach. And publications issued by the OECD, by the European Commission and other institutions show how the dialogue at local level is absolutely vital to implement the 2030 Agenda. In Italy, we have just adopted a huge plan in terms of next generation, in the framework of the Next Generation EU, but also we decided to add a quite remarkable amount of investments with the national funds. Overall, we are talking about 220 billion euros, out of which 62 will be managed by our ministry, the Ministry for Sustainable Infrastructures and Mobility. When I took this position, I proposed to the Prime Minister to change the name of the ministry from Ministry of Infrastructures and Transport to Ministry of Sustainable Development, Sustainable Infrastructures and Mobility, in order exactly to implement the 2030 Agenda philosophy, but also to look at the different policies at territorial level in a coherent way. We are developing a lot of projects that will change the way in which a lot of Italians work, move, and also a very large fraction, 56% of these 62 billion euros will be invested in the south in order to overcome the historically large divides between the center and the north from one side and the south on the other one. But this investment is aimed at changing people's life, companies' competitiveness, renovate the fleets of buses, trains and so on, is coupled with the large investments on high-speed railways. And these changes are also added in our policies for ports and in general logistics, with an investment also in terms of digital services to make the mobility of people not only easier, but also the possibility of integrating the different modes of transport. Let me just conclude these comments with the idea of supporting very strongly the project on transport, health and environment pan-European program, which in my view is very key in this particular moment. This program will provide a significant contribution towards sustainable, safe and inclusive transport and mobility systems. 6 years since the Paris Agreement, the recovery from the pandemic offers a unique opportunity to reinforce the multilateral agenda, commitment to fight climate change and to foster a virtuous circle of socio-economic development and international cooperation. The chairmanship by Italy of the G20, where these issues are being addressed, but also the forthcoming COP26 conference will be a unique opportunity to compare our commitments, but this program, of course, can help us in moving beyond, of course, the COP26 in order to really transform our countries, people's life, improving them, and also raising the competitiveness and economic growth of our territories. Thank you again.
Thanks a lot to this contribution from Italy. We'll move to Luxembourg. Ms. Carole Dijsbourg, Minister for the Environment, Climate and Sustainable Development of Luxembourg, will also join us via a video statement.
Good afternoon, dear colleagues, and first of all, I would like to thank our colleagues for the opportunity to take part in this ministerial session focusing on climate neutrality. Rethinking and rebuilding our transport sector and our mobility systems is a huge and a complex challenge, and it requires a long-time collective effort. But beside this, it's also a big opportunity because we're going to meet our climate targets. We will have lots of positive effects like better air quality, less noise pollution, more space for children to play in our cities, more road safety. So despite these opportunities, we see that the emissions from the transport sector have not shown any significant decrease over the past decades. Our transport systems are still heavily dependent on fossil energy sources, and the demand for mobility is continuously increasing. So we will have a lot to do. And there's no doubt that a broad mix of ambitious policies and measures are required in order to reach our climate objectives. Electromobility will be an important part of the solution, but electromobility alone will definitely not be sufficient to reach climate neutrality by 2050 at the very latest. It will therefore be essential to move away from the marginal reductions of emissions towards the creation of a net zero transport system by 2050. And this means that we have to do a paradigm shift. A paradigm shift by conceiving new cities. A paradigm shift by investing in soft mobility and sustainable mobility. What this means to invest in public transportation systems, and Luxembourg is a driver in this. So we have been the first country to have free public transport system. So setting ambitious targets which ensure reliable conditions for long-term investment can be a powerful driver and provides a clear long-term perspective, for instance for the automotive industry, as well to those who are owners or consumers. This can only be achieved through a set of coherent policies and regulations set, for instance, at a European level. This will have to include, amongst others, a phase-out date for the sale of new petrol and diesel cars and vans, together with a gradual phase-out of the most emitting new vehicles. Further incentives for manufacturers to develop and produce new zero-emission vehicles will also be required. Of course, this policy will have to be completed by country-specific measures such as incentives, regulation, or carbon pricing. Other key elements in this transition are obviously charging and refueling infrastructure for zero-emission solutions, focusing on electricity and green hydrogen, especially for the freight sector. So if we fail to act now, this means that the problems that we know coming from the transport sector, like air or noise pollution, they will remain. So we will have to work together for a better mobility for all. And with this, I wish you a productive exchange of views this afternoon.
Thanks a lot to Carole and to Luxembourg. We'll move to the Slovak Republic for an input by Jan Budaj, Minister of the Environment. The floor is yours, Excellency.
Thank you very much, Madam Minister. Thank you, Austria, and thank you for organizing the PEP, and thank you for inviting us. Slovakia is a rapidly developing country. Since 1990, when communistic regime fallen, we have reduced emissions by more than 40%. but transport-originated emissions have grown by more than 60%. This balance illustrates very clearly and why we need to strive dynamically for change. That is why we were able to pursue reduction or complete closure or fade out of many parts of industries which were damaging, such as exploitation of coal, and all of our heating and power plants using coal will be shut down soon in Slovakia. We do support rail transport. We are going to undergo a major electrification of the last remaining tracks, which were not yet electrified. Slovakia has a very good program of free of charge program for public transport for seniors and students. And also no small part is made by our effort in cycling support. We're going to across the country, intra-regional, not only intra-city, and included in these plans are also public, to whom cycling is becoming more and more popular. We are preparing shared transport products and programs. We wish to offer application for green shared transport through civic taxi vehicles, while the Ministry of Economy had launched a program of exploring hydrogen mobility. All these are things over which I'd like to put another program entirely. European cities are still of last century, many of which are intersections, major crossroads with huge overpasses and underpasses serving to individual transport, passenger cars. And that is the resulting air in those cities, showing this fact. Half of our population in Slovakia also lives in cities, and as though ownership of individual vehicles keeps growing, even during this COVID pandemic, we've learned a lesson that the fear from infection causing purchase of additional passenger cars by our citizens. That is why we need to discuss total mobility reduction. And that is the opportunity through digitization to do so. Let me just get back over the past year. We've learned confer like this, telecommunication means and digital technologies. We had to learn to teach our children and address many political and social aspects which were almost impossible to be done this way through digital means alone. We were able to digitization, which I consider to make a major part of addressing our mobility issue. Just like with waste, the best mobility is one never produced. People do not drive themselves around the cities causing emissions out of fun. The 21st century urbanism and the whole societal structure should keep in mind mobility reduction. Not only clean up mobility, of course, that has to be done as a priority, but a good prospect should be also paid, attention should be paid to mobility share, whether it's global mobility or one within Europe or within individual countries and cities. Indeed, the most quiet and healthy life is one enabling individuals to achieve their goals within the near vicinity, and cities no longer should bet on allowing anyone getting anywhere via passenger cars. They should support as number one priority public transport and stop growing ownership of private vehicles, preferring walking and cycling. We try to support all that and to facilitate all that, even over the experiences over the past 1 year, and also based on Slovakia's acceding to the commitment to reduce greenhouse emissions by 2050, no later than 2050, down to net zero or balanced level. we would like once again, thank you very much. I appreciate the experience we are able to share, and I can listen from other speakers that we can utilize back home here. Thank you once again.
Thanks a lot, dear colleague Jan Budaj. I move to His Excellency Mr. Vladislav Krikli, Minister of Infrastructure of Ukraine. The floor is yours, Excellency.
Many thanks, dear Ms. Federal Minister, dear ministers, dear participants. On behalf of Ukrainian government and on my behalf, let me congratulate all the participants. First of all, with this fifth high-level minister meeting on the transport, health and environment, despite all the circumstances. Ukraine is very interested in developing greener, safer and healthier mobility. We have many things we are implementing already in our national transport strategy for the period 2030. And the main tasks and of this national strategy I will describe now. So our target is to bring the share of the electric vehicles in domestic traffic for 75% for 2030. To ensure the gradual replacement of motor vehicles by electrical transport, in particular by the loans and different terms and improving legislation. And of course, it's economical and measures for stimulating use of cleaner mode of transport for the cities, electric cars, urban transportation, subway, trains, buses, etc. In order to achieve goals, we are taking concrete steps, including the simplifying our legislation and the condition for customs territory of the Ukraine, and the first registration of vehicle, and encouraging at the same time the vehicle equipped with electric motors. Of course, we are including the component of different international financial institutions as European Investment Bank and the European Bank of Reconstruction and Development, and we have two programs for the urban public transportation for Ukraine, for electric rolling stock and electric vehicles for 14 cities in Ukraine. And together with European Bank of Reconstruction and Development, we are launching the development of the infrastructure for electric vehicles, for the superchargers or rapid chargers, and we want to implement the developed network on all the highways with the charger infrastructure and to push it on the next level. Currently, we have over 10,000 of the charger stations in the Ukraine, and it is the growing rate is over 60% if comparing 2020 with 2019. So we are achieving our goals step by step. These are the main measures for our government, and of course for mobility we want to make the transport mobility more green, more safer and more digital as well. And of course we're not forgetting about digital component. So we want that data will be available to ensure the mobility as a service for passenger and cargo. And summarizing, we support the achievement of the goals that set it by Vienna Declaration, and together we will achieve this scheduled with the adoption as a result of the meeting and with the priorities in our transport policy. Thank you for the attention.
Thanks a lot for your intervention. Again, we will move on to hear from Mr. Jonathan Moore, Principal Deputy Assistant Secretary of the Bureau of Oceans and International Environmental and Scientific Affairs of the United States of America. The floor is yours.
Thank you very much. Thank you, honorable ministers and fellow participants. Thanks also to the government of Austria and the UNECE. Very pleased to speak on behalf of the U.S. government today. Thank you for the opportunity. The United States has made very clear that we are taking every effort to tackle the climate challenge and to advance the global effort to keep within reach of the 1.5 Celsius limit on global average temperature increase. We support global efforts to achieve net zero greenhouse emissions no later than 2050. We recognize that the transport sector, the main topic today, of course, constitutes one of the largest sources of greenhouse gas emissions. We are working at home, as well as bilaterally, as many of you know, and multilaterally, to accelerate policy actions that help our transport sectors grapple effectively with climate and the climate challenge. Healthy environment and economy are central to our goals as we recover from the COVID-19 pandemic and as we leverage actions at national, local, and other levels. We are aiming towards a zero-emission vehicle future through ambitious standards to improve fuel efficiency and reduce greenhouse gases. This includes working to accelerate the achievement of 100% zero-emission vehicle sales for light-duty vehicles and increase the supply of and demand for zero-emission medium and heavy-duty vehicles. On aviation, in ICAO and elsewhere, we are working toward reducing the sector's emissions in a manner consistent with the goal of net zero emissions by 2050, and on robust standards that integrate climate protection and safety. We intend to advance the development and deployment of high-integrity sustainable aviation fuels and other clean technologies that meet rigorous international standards. We're also working in key international fora like the International Maritime Organization to reduce emissions from ships. We are working to adopt a goal of achieving zero emissions from international shipping by 2050 and to adopt ambitious measures that will place the entire sector on a pathway to achieve that goal. Thank you very much for the opportunity to participate and for assembling us all today.
Thanks a lot for your very interesting and concise intervention to this debate. I am now very pleased to move to Her Excellency, Ms. Valentina Tapes, State Secretary of the Ministry of Agriculture, Regional Development and Environment of the Republic of Moldova. The floor is yours.
Thank you, dear Chair. I have the great pleasure and the honor to represent the Republic of Moldova at this ministerial meeting, and using the opportunity of this thematic session, I would like to underline the commitments of our country towards sustainable transport and climate neutrality. Through the Republic of Moldova is responsible for less than 0.026% of global greenhouse gas emissions. It is affected by the global warming common with all countries. Moldova dares to lead the way in climate action, and the ambition is to transform this challenge into an opportunity for development. The Republic of Moldova, with the support of EU for Climate project, financed by European Union and implemented by UNDP, become the fourth country in the world that presented its second NDC with increased ambition. The country's new economy-wide unconditional target is to reduce its GHG emissions by 70% below its 1990 level in 2030, increased of 67% as committed in the first NDC, which could be further decreased for 88%. If Moldova manages to mobilize technical, financial, and technological support. For achieving new, more ambitious GHG emissions reduction targets committed in Moldova second NDC, Moldova must strive to a climate neutrality development. In order to implement second NDC, we are in the process of updating the low emission development strategy by 2030. The transport sector contribution for mitigation of the GS emission will be 52% compared to the base year 1990. Despite its small, less than 5% contribution to Moldova's gross domestic product, transport is responsible for 22% of the country's greenhouse gas emissions, the second largest contributor after the energy sector. The transport sector is the main source of air pollution, in particular in urban areas, according for at least 86% of total emissions. Due to this, the Ministry of Agriculture, Regional Development and Environment aims to integrate the clean transport program into an official government policy as part of the update of the program of the promotion of the green economy for this year, 2022-2024, by supporting replacement of a portion of the public transportation fleet in Moldova, in particular in the main urban areas. We have the following major policy objectives. By 2030, reduce greenhouse gas emissions from public transportation, reduce particulate matter PM2.5 emissions from public transportation, and reduce NOx emissions from public transportation by 50%. By achieving these environmental and climate-related targets, these objectives will contribute to improve living conditions of citizens of Moldova. Facilitating better public transportation services will improve access to jobs, health services, or connections of families. Creating a clean environment will have a positive impact on the physical condition of the population and will put less pressure on the health sector. In addition to the priority policy actions, practical measures will be undertaken to achieve development of the guide for the street design in capital city with best practices of urban mobility. Development of the urban mobility plan for the Chișinău municipality. Development of the strategy and action plan for the implementation of the intelligent transport systems in Chișinău by end of 2021. Elaboration of the action plan for special traffic bus lines in Chișinău, development of the strategy for the alternative transport and establishment of the corridor by bicycles, promotion of the ecological transport by establishment of an existing network of charging stations for electric vehicles. At the moment, operational 44 stations in 24 localities and in the plan by the end of the year to have 20 more. By this policy and practical actions, the Republic of Moldova aims to achieve the goals of reducing pollution from transport and move towards a climate neutrality by ensuring green, safe and healthy mobility. Thank you for your attention.
Thanks a lot to Moldova. I will now move again to voices from civil society. And at the end of a very intense, very dense, very rich session also, I would like to remind everybody of the 3 minutes. You have a timer in front of you. So Mr. Brownrand Thornton, the Chief Executive Officer of WOC22's local partnership, Mrs. Sorry, excuse me, I misread my notes. The floor is yours. Thanks for your intervention in advance.
Thank you very much. I speak to you today as chair of the SLOCAT Partnership, Sustainable Low Carbon Transport Partnership. We are grateful for the opportunity to speak and talk to you along this climate neutrality. We, being those of us in a position to act, we're at a critical point in our responsibilities to ensure delivery of both climate action and a healthy, economically viable transport system. We've heard some fantastic actions and ambitions throughout today. It is the end of the day, and I'm inspired by what I've heard, but we're not winning yet. We're still not on track. We're losing the race, and we must make up this lost ground. The pathway to climate neutrality can't be paved just with good intentions. It needs clear, coherent strategies that deliver on health and equity as well as climate goals. It's imperative that every decision we make, every investment we improve, not just some, not just on Sundays, but every policy and program we support is designed to deliver on this critical agenda. From the unique position of the PEP and the UNECE, it is critical to send clear messages to the broader political and professional community that the paradigm shift is now business as usual. On behalf of Slogat, I want to identify some clear priorities to fulfill this agenda. We heard actually from Jerry Balmer about avoid, shift and improve. It's a fantastic coherent framework to shape transport demand and supply to support travel by sustainable modes. This needs coordinated public policy across all three of those elements of a transport framework. We need to focus on cost-effective measures with high sustainable development benefits, bus lanes, e-bikes, parking policy, commuter catchments for public transport. We need to align pricing with external costs, direct revenues to support sustainable transport priorities. London congestion charging is an example of this. We need to support national stakeholder platforms which bring together cities, companies, civil society to elaborate the synergies between our different elements. And we need to communicate the urgency and the benefits and the successes of doing so. And the PEP is critical to this. You bring together the stakeholders from all of these different communities. You can create integrated strategies and actions across the UN system between UNECE, UN Environment, WHO, UNFCCC, and through all of the different conferences, we can coordinate clear messages and agendas. We need to quantify the medium and long-term economic benefits, the avoided future health and the avoided transport costs, and we need to stimulate a reform of transport pricing to incentivize and fund sustainable low-carbon modes and solutions. We must not lose sight of the urgency of our situation. It will take sticks as well as carrots. We cannot wait for incentives alone to deliver change. We must create the conditions whereby the climate neutral option is the best one available and that people want to choose. This means that safe, green, healthy mobility becomes the primary mode in our communities. I wish you well in our endeavours to achieve this. Thank you.
Thanks for this positive outlook. And I'm moving to Mr. François Daven, Secretary General of the International Union of Railways.
So thank you very much, dear Minister, dear colleagues, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you for giving me the opportunity to speak a little bit about priorities for rail. And I would like to insist on the fact that now we have definitely to bring a sense of urgency in all our speeches. We all know that climate change is ongoing. Our action will mitigate its effect, but we have to live in times of uncertainties, being confronted with non-linear phenomenon that will have consequences on transport, infrastructure, water resources, agriculture, public health, and so on. In this difficult period, the transport networks must take their responsibilities and must shift to low-emission mode. Railways are part of the solution, since while being about 10% of the market, they contribute for less than 3% of the global emissions. Furthermore, society is benefiting from the improved efficiency and inclusivity brought by railways, such as decreased road fatalities, injuries, and local air pollution. In a nutshell, the priority for our sector is to choose to finance transformational projects for railways at a regional and global level. Transformational projects are those that will have a big impact on efficiency in the short term, such as digitization, seamless interconnection with other modes, the capacity of using better existing infrastructures. Those projects will be a driver for the modal shift to rail and public transport in order to achieve the objective of the SDG and the Green Deal in Europe. Let me give you a brief overview of these transformations. For the passenger transport, by 2030, most passengers will arrive at train station on foot, bicycle, or public transport, and not all the time to just take a train. People will spend time in station to use co-working, for shopping, entertainment, and so on. The station will feel part of the city or community it serves. Most passenger journeys will be made with multimodal e-tickets. Passengers will be able to move seamlessly between different modes of transport. On board the train, some passengers will have their e-scooter on board and they are charging them while they travel. Reliability is improving with digital and predictive maintenance. When there are issues in the services, information systems react quickly and allow passengers to flex the way they travel to get where they need with minimum disruption. For the freight customer, by 2030, many more customers will be using rail because it's getting easier to use, multimodal logistic chains. Hubs will be electrified and well linked to both road and canal and also seaport. Digital platform will allow customers to track where their goods are and tell customer and investor just how much CO2 emissions they have saved by them in using rail. Trains will be quieter for lights and neighbors due to innovative new braking systems and track design. Complete doping and access to new routes have opened up in even more populated area. To achieve this vision of 2030, the following action must take place now by policymakers and national governments. Set binding and ambitious transport model shift and decarbonization target. Set policies that incentivize the use of rail, public transport, cycling and walking by pricing the external environmental costs for transport, support public investment in public transport infrastructure, and enable stronger linkages between land use and transport planning. That's in a nutshell what we have to achieve in a very, very short term. Thank you for your attention.
Thanks a lot to Mr. Lavin for giving an update from the railway perspective. Ms. Malak Shukurova, Executive Director of the Regional Environmental Center for the Caucasus, is the next one on my speakers list. The floor is yours.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you for having us in the platform. It's an honor to welcome you on behalf of the Regional Environment Center for the Caucasus, at the regional organization which covers 3 South Caucasus countries, Armenia, Azerbaijan, and Georgia. Well, the world depends far too much on oil as a fuel source, and particularly for the transport sector. Transport sector in South Caucasus countries are among top emitters of greenhouse gases. And here, we would like to share the position of Mr. Dirk Messener, which see the solution also in shifting to strengthening and greening of public transport sector. We believe that development and implementation of cleaner alternative fuels and innovative technology is an obvious way to reduce this dependence and the associated pollution. We had a brilliant case for this of Nordic countries who lead the world in electric vehicle uptake. And when it comes to e-mobility, our countries are moving towards the greener mobility and safer transportation in the framework. I would like to give some examples that prove once again how important and all these issues for our countries. From 2019, the import of electrical cars of Azerbaijan is exempt from VAT, and custom duties for electrical car amount leads to the 15%. And in 2019, the same Minister of Environment of Armenia initiated the development and adoption of legislative provision, effectively waiving the 20% of the VAT on the import and sale of electrical vehicles until the end of the 2021. Of course, Georgian government, Georgia leader in this case, and decreased the VAT since 2016 for electrical and hybrid cars. We also see the cities which joined the Covenant of Mayors for Climate and Energy initiatives in all 3 countries. Here we also can say that Yerevan municipality, Vanadzor, and Gyumri of Armenian cities are making serious steps to promote e-mobility, currently designing the roads for electrical buses to cover interstate roads, complementing to decrease the emissions and promoting climate-friendly green transport. And as we heard from the speech of the Deputy Minister of Georgia, the preparation and implementation of air quality plans in Georgia for 2 big cities, Tbilisi and Rustavi, developed with active cooperation of all entities related to transport, health, and environment, with the main aim to move the carbon neutrality. South Caucasus countries, of course, have a long way to shifting zero-emission transport, and Red Caucasus believe that government should strengthen development and implementation of national action plans that would include transport, health and environment, create green and healthy jobs, expand capacity building mechanism linking science, policy and practice. and to encourage citizens to use electrical vehicles and strengthening greening of public transport, and of course, increase investment for public transport sector. Meanwhile, public awareness programs and financial incentives like national subsidies and reduced taxes needed to be developed and deployed further. Having a strong network on regional, national, and local levels, REC caucuses welcome the PEP in promotion of eco-driving and cycling on all levels, in supporting countries in integration of transport, health, and environmental objectives into the development planning. We believe that PEP can serve as a bridge between private companies, financial institutions, and the government to create and apply effective financial incentives to achieve carbon neutrality. Thank you.
Thanks a lot. And now last, but definitely not least, Mr. Matej Zakonjiek. I'm sorry if I mispronounced your name at the end of the day, Director of the Transport Community. The floor is yours.
Thank you, Minister, and good afternoon. It's a special pleasure being the last speaker for today's ministerial meeting, and one of the benefits of this is that everything what I had to say was already said. So perhaps allow me to use this time to mention what I heard very clearly. And this is that the time for action, the time for reforms, as well as investments in green transport revolution is really now. And secondly, that there is really enough political support and a vision to turn these words into reality and these challenges into opportunities. But of course, the key question remains, do we have enough strength to transform our policies in the way that will require not only these incremental changes, but really a seismic shift of the decades-long paradigms, as mentioned by the Minister Hatabi, and habits of how we move and travel. As is in the rest of Europe, in the Western Balkans region, which is the focus of transport community, is very much affected by the challenging and changing climate and has already seen several consequences of climate change, such as several floods, as well as very polluted air in the major cities. But in the Western Balkans, we know that the only solution for our planet is to really think globally, to plan regionally, but to act locally. And for the Transport Community Permanent Secretariat, we are together with our partners developing sustainable and smart mobility strategy for Western Balkans, which will mirror EU strategy with exactly the same name. So, ladies and gentlemen, the path to greener, healthier, and more sustainable transport is clear. I hope that next time we meet, we can take today's promises and turn it into a checklist of our achievements. And we can perhaps rename this panel from climate neutrality, the challenge for green, safe, and healthy mobility, to climate neutrality, the biggest opportunity for green, safe, and healthy mobility. Thank you very much.
Thanks a lot for this perfect wrap-up of this afternoon's intervention. We'll take the opportunity, I'd say, at the end of this afternoon. I would like to thank all the participants really very warm-heartedly for their inspiring, encouraging, very rich, also geographically very diverse interventions. It was a pleasure. It was an extremely interesting afternoon. And I will invite all the participants to be back tomorrow morning to reconnect maybe a few minutes before 10 a.m. for the continuation of this high-level meeting. The connection details are the same for tomorrow as they were for today. So I can only leave you this afternoon with a warm thank you for your inputs. Very much looking forward to tomorrow's debates and tomorrow's also adoption of a really unique document we've spent a lot of time working on, and maybe with a glimpse of what one building block of the future of mobility in our region can be. Germany, Czech Republic, and Austria announced today that will invest in a new pan-European railway infrastructure connecting Vienna and Berlin in just about 4 hours. So halving train travel times in one of the good and important connection, and that there's many more projects like this on the way, I'm sure. So yes, to sum up what Matej said, I think we have the strength, we have the ideas, we have the courage to do it, and we'll continue to discuss and to implement the next steps from tomorrow on. I'll see you tomorrow morning at 10 a.m. Looking forward to continuing the debate. I close the session for today.